Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that might surprise you: cats in medieval libraries. Yep, those sleek creatures that roam your home, lazily batting at anything that moves, were once revered and even employed in some of the most sacred and quiet places of knowledge, libraries. It's hard to imagine a furry feline in the midst of dust-covered manuscripts, surrounded by scribes meticulously copying texts, but it was a reality back in the day. Imagine the scene: you're in a stone-walled, dimly lit room. The smell of parchment, ink, and candle smoke fills the air. The hushed murmur of monks copying ancient texts resonates in the background. But wait, there's a soft padding sound. No, it's not a ghost, it's a cat, slinking through the shadows, weaving between wooden tables, and settling down next to a stack of fragile scrolls. Cats, once considered mystical and practical, found a rather unlikely home in these scholarly spaces. Now, before you get too cozy picturing this serene scene with purring cats nestled among books, I've got a little reality check for you. This wasn't your average sit on the couch and nap kind of role. These cats were on a mission, literally. They weren't lounging in the warm glow of a fireplace. Their presence was essential, their role more practical than just being cute. You probably won't survive this, but stick with me as we dig into why these cats were actually needed to keep libraries functioning in medieval times. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Always fun to see where my audience is listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Medieval libraries were unlike anything we think of today. They were sacred spaces. These libraries were often located in monasteries, where the preservation of ancient knowledge and religious texts took priority. And as much as we might picture the atmosphere as one of perfect serenity, filled with monks quietly copying out the holy scriptures, the truth is, these places were full of problems. Yes, even back then, libraries had pests, big ones. Mice, rats, and other creatures that would find their way into these precious repositories of knowledge and destroy manuscripts with a nibble here and there. You can imagine the horror of a monk finding a half-chewed scroll. I'm sure there were some moments of pure panic. But how did cats of all creatures end up in this delicate sacred space? The answer is simple: pest control. Cats had been revered in ancient Egypt for their roles in protecting food stores and temples from vermin. Over time, their practical skills in hunting evolved into a kind of cultural symbolism. By the time medieval Europe came around, cats were still viewed as symbols of mystery, intelligence, and even sacredness. They were the guardians of both food and knowledge, helping protect the very texts that were so precious to the clergy and intellectuals of the time. In fact, in some places, cats were even seen as protectors of the soul. Their presence in libraries wasn't just about chasing away rats and mice. Cats were seen as creatures of purity and mystery, fitting companions for the learned scholars who were dedicated to preserving and transmitting knowledge. Some historians argue that the cat's role in religious life was just as important as its practical duties. Cats were believed to possess a kind of wisdom, and in a world where superstition ran deep, they became symbols of intellectual power. In the quiet of the scriptorium, where monks spent hours copying holy texts by hand, having a cat nearby was seen as a kind of silent protection. The cat, though a creature of instinct, was more than just a silent observer. It was believed to enhance the knowledge being created and protect the integrity of those sacred words. But let's backtrack a bit to understand why cats were needed in the first place. Medieval libraries, particularly those housed in monasteries, weren't just places of learning, they were places of preservation. The manuscripts, which often took years to complete, were incredibly valuable. These weren't just any books, they were the means by which knowledge was passed down through generations. The idea of losing one due to a rodent's nibble wasn't just inconvenient, it was catastrophic. Enter the cat. These little hunters had an innate skill that made them ideal for the job. Cats are natural predators. Their agility and sharp reflexes made them perfect for hunting down small animals like rats, which would otherwise have free rein to chew through parchment and scrolls. And unlike dogs, who might have been too rowdy or noisy, cats blended into the background. They could be left to roam freely through the stacks of books and scrolls without disturbing the quiet work of the monks or scribes. In fact, it was probably a relief to have a creature that could take care of pests without causing a ruckus. Historians still argue whether the cat's role in libraries was purely practical, or if it also had symbolic weight. Were they just doing their job, or were they mystical beings that added an air of divine protection to the space? The truth is probably a bit of both. Cats were seen as protectors of knowledge, but they also had a very real, down-to-earth purpose. They kept the library safe, quite literally. So as we ease into this deep dive into the role of medieval cats in libraries, think about how these creatures, so often seen as aloof and independent, were once the unsung heroes of intellectual preservation. Without them, the libraries we treasure today might not have survived the centuries of wear and tear that have come since. Now, you might be wondering, how did we get here? How did these mysterious creatures end up being the guardians of medieval libraries? Well, to understand that, we need to rewind the clock all the way back to ancient Egypt, where cats first earned their royal reputation. And believe me, it wasn't just about being cute. No, cats were far more than companions. They were revered almost like gods. In ancient Egypt, cats were associated with the goddess Bastet, who was the goddess of home, fertility, and interestingly, protection. She was often depicted as a lioness or a woman with a cat's head. Bastet embodied the balance between the nurturing and protective aspects of life, and cats, being her earthly counterparts, naturally inherited these qualities. The Egyptians saw cats not just as animals but as symbols of divine protection, guardians of the home, and protectors of grain stores. Cats were so important that at one point they were regarded as sacred creatures, and killing one, even accidentally, was punishable by death. But the role of cats in Egypt wasn't just symbolic, they were incredibly practical too. Ancient Egyptian farmers, who were living in close proximity to grain stores, found that rats and mice had a notorious habit of sneaking into their food supplies and ruining the harvest. As any farmer knows, the loss of a harvest could mean famine, so they needed a solution. That's where the cats came in. Instead of resorting to traps or poison, which could harm the food as well as the pests, the Egyptians invited the cats into their granaries. The cats naturally took to hunting the rodents, and over time, this symbiotic relationship grew. The farmers didn't have to do much. They simply allowed the cats to roam freely, and in return, the cats kept their grain safe. This relationship worked so well that it became ingrained in Egyptian society. The Egyptians even went so far as to keep cats as pets in their homes, where they'd act as both guardians and companions. Cats' importance extended far beyond their roles in homes and farms. They were present in temples, where they would roam freely, adding a sense of spiritual protection to these sacred spaces. And while they were revered by the general populace, the royal family particularly saw the value in having cats around. Cats were frequently depicted in ancient Egyptian art, often in scenes where they were lounging beside their owners or playing with small animals. The idea was clear: cats were elite animals, associated with divine power, but also incredibly useful. Historians still argue whether cats were fully domesticated at this point, or if their relationship with humans was more symbiotic than what we might consider a pet-owner dynamic today. However, the fact remains that the Egyptians were the first to recognize the sheer practicality and spiritual significance of cats. It wasn't long before cats began making their way to other civilizations, including Europe, where their role evolved into that of protectors in medieval libraries. By the time the cats made their way to the European continent, they had already built a reputation as protectors of food and, as we've seen, symbols of protection in temples. Their journey from Egypt to Europe was part of a greater movement of ideas, culture and trade. As trade routes expanded, cats spread along with them, finding themselves not only in homes but also in the sacred spaces of monasteries and libraries, where their protective instincts once again became highly valuable. Now, this is where things start to get really interesting. While ancient Egypt viewed cats as divine creatures, the medieval world had a more practical, and dare I say slightly cynical, view of them. Yes, cats still carried with them some level of spiritual significance, but their real value came from their ability to protect precious resources, namely, books and manuscripts. You see, in Europe, Libraries weren't just about preserving knowledge, they were places of incredible power. The monks and scribes who worked within these spaces were often considered the gatekeepers of both religious and secular knowledge. Having a cat around to keep pests at bay was simply too practical to ignore. Some historians argue that the early association between cats and temples in Egypt had a lasting influence on how they were perceived in medieval Europe. Cats were still seen as guardians, though now instead of keeping the temple granaries safe, they were keeping scrolls, manuscripts, and other priceless written works intact. The connection between knowledge and divine protection, both spiritual and practical, seems to have carried forward into these medieval libraries. In fact, the protective role of cats in these spaces can't be overstated. In the days before modern pest control, keeping rodents out of a library wasn't just a matter of convenience, it was a matter of survival. A mouse nibbling on a manuscript could render it completely useless, and that was simply unacceptable to the scholars of the time. In their eyes, a mouse was more than just a nuisance, it was a direct threat to the integrity of the knowledge they worked tirelessly to preserve. So in many ways, the presence of cats in libraries wasn't just about keeping things tidy, it was about protecting the very foundation of intellectual life in medieval Europe. You might be wondering by now how this divine and practical dual-purpose relationship between cats and their owners developed. Historians still debate the precise nature of this bond. Were cats seen as mystical beings, or was their presence more about keeping the place in order? Perhaps a little of both. The truth is, cats' roles in ancient and medieval times were shaped by a combination of superstition, practicality, and a long history of reverence for these creatures. The connection between cats and ancient Egypt is so strong that it's hard not to look at the medieval library cats through the same lens. These cats, no longer wandering the temples of Egypt, but now prowling the darkened halls of monastic libraries, were still seen as a link to something greater, something that even in the dusty old libraries of Europe was considered worth protecting at all costs. So by now, we've seen that cats were revered in ancient Egypt, and their journey to Europe was rooted in practicality and mysticism. But what happened when these sacred creatures found their way into the heart of medieval European culture? Well, let me tell you, things got interesting. In medieval Europe, cats were a symbol of many things: mystery, magic, independence, and sometimes even the devil. Yes, you heard me right. While they were largely seen as noble creatures, their association with ancient Egyptian gods and their role as mysterious solitary animals led them to become entwined with some strange and superstitious beliefs. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Cats in medieval Europe were more than just figures in folklore. They played real, practical roles, and one of those roles was within the hallowed halls of libraries. Now, unlike their revered status in Egypt, cats in medieval Europe weren't universally loved. In fact, their relationship with humans was often complicated by the ever-present fear of witchcraft and the supernatural. You see, cats, particularly black cats, were often linked to witches and sorcery. In the minds of many, cats' independence, nocturnal habits, and sleek, silent movements made them seem otherworldly. In some places, people even believed that witches transformed into cats, or that cats themselves were witches' familiars. So while cats were still seen as protectors, they also had this shadowy, darker side. Historians still debate whether the association between cats and witches was the sole reason for their somewhat mixed reputation, or if the combination of their mysticism and their practical skills was what cemented their place in European culture. Regardless, cats were somewhat of a paradox. They were revered in some circles and feared in others. But what was undeniable was their utility, especially in places where the preservation of knowledge was paramount. And that's where the libraries come in. In medieval Europe, libraries were often housed in monasteries, and monks and scribes spent hours each day transcribing religious texts by hand. These spaces were crucial to preserving ancient knowledge, but as we've seen, they were also plagued by pests. Mice and rats were a constant threat, not just to the physical space, but to the integrity of the manuscripts themselves. If a rat chewed through a page of scripture, that could be the loss of not just a book, but a piece of history. It's in these environments that cats really started to shine. Cats weren't just companions in the monastery, they were employed for a very specific purpose. These clever felines didn't need to be trained to catch mice. Their instincts were all they needed. and the monks, who understood the importance of keeping their sacred texts intact, embraced these cats as protectors of their precious work. You can picture it now, a monk bent over his manuscript, his quill scratching away, while a cat prowls nearby, watching for any sign of intruding pests. The presence of a cat was a quiet assurance that the manuscripts, those irreplaceable conduits of faith and knowledge, would remain safe. Interestingly, there's a quirky side to this relationship too. While monks were serious about their duties, they were also human. They sometimes found a bit of humor and comfort in their feline companions. Cats, with their independent and playful nature, brought a certain likeness to the otherwise serious and somber lives of the monks. Imagine being stuck in a dimly lit room for hours copying scripture, only to have a cat jump onto your lap or sneakily bat at your quill. It's easy to see how these cats might have brought a bit of levity to an otherwise quiet, often solitary life. But beyond their practical use as pest controllers, cats were also woven into the fabric of medieval European culture in more abstract ways. Cats became symbols of certain virtues, particularly independence and curiosity. For the intellectuals of the time, the cat's ability to live both independently and cooperatively with humans seemed to embody the spirit of knowledge itself, a balance between individual thinking and communal learning. Cats were admired for their silent, solitary nature, as they could navigate the monastery without disrupting the quiet work of the monks. This made them not only practical, but also fitting guardians of sacred texts. At the same time, cats also served as a reminder of the balance between light and dark. On one hand, they were associated with the divine protection of knowledge, but on the other hand, they were also thought to have connections to the supernatural, the unseen world. This made them fascinating creatures, embodying both the tangible pest control and the intangible spiritual protection. Some monks believed that having a cat in their midst helped keep their work pure, almost as though the cat's mysterious presence kept the integrity of their transcriptions intact. Historians still argue whether cats in medieval libraries were purely a practical addition, or if they carried deeper symbolic meaning. Were they there to protect the manuscripts, or did they also serve as a kind of spiritual guardian? Some say the monks and scribes saw the cats as protectors of wisdom, while others believed that the cats were simply necessary for the day-to-day survival of the library's most precious assets. Regardless of the spiritual or practical lens through which we view them, one thing is clear: cats were indispensable in these sacred spaces. They were both protectors and companions, seamlessly blending into the culture of knowledge that defined medieval libraries. And though we may view them as simple creatures today, their role in preserving knowledge and protecting ancient manuscripts was anything but trivial. By now, you can probably picture the contrast: a monastery library filled with the quiet rustling of monks at work, and the occasional flick of a cat's tail slipping silently through the shelves. It's a scene that blends practicality with mysticism, and that's what makes the story of medieval cats in libraries so fascinating. Medieval libraries, these were not your average everyday bookshelves full of old novels. No, these libraries were intellectual powerhouses, far more important than the libraries we think of today. Imagine the vast ancient scrolls filled with sacred knowledge, tucked away in dimly lit rooms, their parchment edges frayed with age. Now, imagine that these places were the epicenter of learning during the medieval period. It's no exaggeration to say that the survival of knowledge from the ancient world to the present day largely depends on the careful hands of the monks, scribes, and yes, cats who worked to preserve it. Libraries in the medieval world weren't just repositories for books, they were sanctuaries of intellect and spiritual life. At the time, monasteries and cathedral schools were among the few places where literacy was maintained. While the vast majority of the population was illiterate, a small group of monks and scholars worked diligently to copy manuscripts, preserving the knowledge of the ancients and the teachings of the Church. These manuscripts were invaluable, often containing the only surviving copies of religious texts, philosophical writings, and classical works from the Roman and Greek eras. The responsibility was enormous. These scribes weren't just copying texts, they were safeguarding humanity's intellectual legacy. Now let's talk about the physicality of these libraries. Monastic libraries, for example, were typically small cloistered spaces attached to the main church or abbey. The walls were lined with shelves upon shelves of scrolls and codices, some of them hundreds of years old.
There was no Dewey Decimal System back then, of course. Instead, the monks relied on a kind of informal organization system. By the time you got to the middle of the library, you might have no idea what was on the shelf to your left, but you trusted that the monk who worked in that corner had a good memory. Interestingly, the library's design reflected their role as a space for not just preservation, but also intense contemplation and study. Quiet was sacred in these libraries, so quiet in fact, that the monks developed an almost ritualistic relationship with their texts. A monk might spend hours transcribing a single manuscript, but the environment was one of focused serenity. In these spaces, cats had a unique and fitting role. Libraries were already hallowed places of knowledge, but adding a cat, quiet, solitary and protective, seemed almost like the final touch to a sacred space. But here's where things get fascinating. These libraries weren't only for religious texts. While many manuscripts were indeed biblical or theological, others focused on law, medicine, philosophy and science. In fact, some of the greatest minds of the time used libraries as a means of preserving and sharing ideas that were ahead of their time. Imagine, for instance, the sheer number of historical documents that needed protection. Texts that spoke about the natural world, even rudimentary understandings of physics or medicine, were considered vital to the intellectual well-being of Europe. These were the books that would influence future generations of scholars, shaping the course of European history for centuries. The importance of these libraries cannot be overstated. They were not simply dusty rooms filled with old books. They were the heart of knowledge, in a world that was still fighting for intellectual freedom and exploration. The monks, scribes and cats who inhabited these spaces were, in their own way, the keepers of light during a time when the rest of the world was plunged into the darkness of superstition and ignorance. Now, let's circle back to those pesky rodents we mentioned earlier. The role of cats in these libraries, as protectors of manuscripts, was incredibly significant. There was always a looming threat to these precious texts: rats, mice and other pests, who would gladly chew through a well-loved book. For a time, the only defense against this destruction was the cat. They didn't need training. Their instincts told them what to do. Cats prowled the shelves, slipped silently between books, and made sure the library stayed safe from pests. Monks could focus on the work of preserving knowledge, safe in the knowledge that their silent companions were on duty, safeguarding their manuscripts from harm. Yet, the role of libraries wasn't limited to physical protection alone. There was also a spiritual aspect to the libraries. In a world dominated by the Catholic Church, these libraries were also a kind of spiritual hub. Monks were expected to devote their lives to God, but part of their spiritual practice involved studying the holy texts and interpreting them for the rest of society. The library, therefore, became a space for both intellectual and spiritual contemplation. It wasn't just a place to read books. It was a place where you were meant to gain wisdom and enlightenment, both religious and secular. Here's the thing though. Historians still argue whether the role of the medieval library was as much about intellectual freedom as it was about spiritual control. Was it a safe haven for the free flow of knowledge, or were the monks simply copying texts to serve the church's agenda? Some argue that these libraries were meant to preserve knowledge, but that knowledge was very much under the control of the church. The question remains, did the monks have intellectual freedom, or were they just cogs in a system that ultimately controlled the dissemination of ideas? Despite these debates, one thing remains clear. These libraries were the centers of learning, preservation and protection of knowledge. And this is where our furry little friends came in. Cats may have been seen as protectors of the physical space, but they also represented a much larger role in the preservation of intellectual history. Through their quiet, instinctive acts, they safeguarded the written word that would survive for centuries. In their own mysterious, sometimes mythological way, cats had a role in the intellectual evolution of Europe. Imagine, for a moment, how strange it must have seemed to the monks of the time to see a cat, often considered a somewhat mystical creature, weaving its way through the rows of manuscripts, its body a reminder that there was something more than just human efforts at work in this place of study. Was it simply the cat's instinct to hunt, or was there something divine about its presence in this sacred space? Historians still debate, but one thing is clear: cats were there to stay, and their role in preserving knowledge, even in this quiet, subtle way, cannot be forgotten. Now, let's zoom out a little, and take a step back. We've been talking about cats in libraries, but why were animals in general so integral to medieval life? Medieval society had a deep and complicated relationship with the animal kingdom. From the majestic to the mundane, Animals weren't just part of the physical world, they were embedded in the cultural, spiritual, and social fabric of life. Whether they were being seen as symbols of virtues, domesticated companions, or sacred creatures, animals had a much more significant place in medieval times than we might assume today. Let's start with one of the most crucial roles animals played: symbolism. Animals in medieval Europe were often used as metaphors for human behavior and characteristics. A lion might symbolize courage and strength, while a fox was associated with cunning and trickery. But here's where it gets interesting. Cats, especially in the context of libraries, were a symbol of mystery, independence, and intelligence. And it wasn't just cats. The role of animals in medieval religious art, manuscripts, and stories reveals how deeply entwined they were in the cultural psyche. Cats, in particular, were often seen as creatures that embodied the mysterious and elusive aspects of life. They were solitary, silent hunters, with a kind of grace that suggested both independence and wisdom. While dogs were often seen as loyal companions and protectors, cats were more aloof, making them figures of intrigue. This sense of mystery is part of the reason why they became symbols in libraries, places dedicated to the search for knowledge. A cat's ability to move in and out of a room unnoticed, its stealthy nature, mirrored the quiet but vital work being done by the monks and scholars within those same walls. But this wasn't just about symbolism. Animals were also extremely practical in medieval society. Cats' natural skills in hunting were indispensable in many places, including homes, farms, and of course libraries. As we've seen, they were especially useful in keeping away the rats and mice that plagued the stored goods. While today we have all sorts of traps and technologies to control pests, the medieval world relied heavily on the animals around them. Cats were their first line of defense, but don't be fooled, they weren't the only animals on the job. Monasteries often housed a variety of animals, including dogs, horses, and even birds. The abbey's relationship with its animals went beyond utility. These creatures were part of a broader medieval understanding of the natural world, one that intertwined the physical and spiritual realms. In fact, the connection between animals and human life in the medieval period was so deep that some animals, like horses and dogs, had specific roles in religious rituals. Horses were often used in processions, while dogs were kept as companions, guardians, and even as symbols of loyalty and faith. The fact that animals were considered vital in both the mundane and sacred tasks of daily life made them an integral part of society. Cats, however, were unique in the sense that their role in both the spiritual and practical realms was more ambiguous. Neither entirely domestic nor completely wild, cats seemed to occupy a liminal space in medieval culture.
Interestingly, this dual nature of the cat, part sacred, part practical, may have contributed to its widespread acceptance in libraries. Cats weren't confined to the monastic world. They were found in the homes of nobility, in royal courts, and even in the homes of merchants. Their widespread presence in various social strata gave them a unique status. A cat could be a pet, a symbol, or a worker, sometimes all at once. The fact that they could comfortably move between these worlds made them especially suited to the libraries of medieval Europe, where both intellectual work and spiritual contemplation were taking place. But let's not forget the darker side of this story, because in medieval Europe, the line between reverence and superstition was thin. While cats were symbols of wisdom and mystery, they were also associated with witches, demons, and the occult. This connection likely arose from their nocturnal habits, their quiet movements, and their seemingly independent nature. As Christianity began to dominate medieval Europe, anything that wasn't completely understood or controlled was viewed with suspicion. Cats, with their stealthy ways and their ancient associations with Egyptian gods, fit perfectly into this narrative. Some parts of Europe viewed black cats as omens of bad luck or even evil. But here's the twist: while cats were associated with witches in some areas, in other parts of Europe, they were actually thought to protect the home and hearth from evil spirits. It's fascinating how this mix of fear and reverence shaped the role of cats in medieval society. In the end, despite the darker associations, cats were too useful and too symbolic to be completely dismissed. And then there's the practical aspect again. Cats were also used for their hunting abilities in more than just monasteries. They were kept by farmers to protect crops from vermin, by sailors to guard food supplies during long voyages, and by the wealthy to protect their homes from rats. But perhaps the most interesting part of all this is that despite their somewhat controversial status in folklore, Cats were embraced in the spaces that mattered most, the intellectual and spiritual hubs of medieval Europe. Historians still argue whether the medieval reverence for animals like cats was an indication of a deeper connection with the natural world, or if it was merely a reflection of superstition. Regardless, the place of animals in medieval society was undeniable. From being symbols of divine protection to practical workers, animals, especially cats, had a role that extended far beyond the simple companionship we might think of today. In the end, the cat's presence in medieval libraries can be seen as part of this larger cultural and spiritual reverence for animals. Cats weren't just protecting books, they were part of the mystical, intellectual and spiritual forces that shaped the medieval world. Their role in libraries was symbolic of a deeper truth, that knowledge, much like the cat, was something that could not be fully understood, controlled or tamed. It had its own mystery and its own grace, much like the feline creatures that roamed the halls of these ancient sacred spaces. Let's continue exploring the sacred world of medieval libraries, but this time we're taking a step deeper into the monasteries themselves. The medieval monastery was more than just a place of worship, it was also a hub of learning and scholarly activity. Picture a stone building filled with the scent of burning incense and the soft rustle of parchment as monks laboriously copied religious texts by hand. These monasteries were the heart of intellectual life in the medieval period, preserving ancient knowledge and shaping the intellectual landscape of Europe. And in this quiet, scholarly world, you'd find an unexpected but very important presence: the monastery cat. Monasteries were the places where the bulk of medieval knowledge was stored, written and preserved. While monks were transcribing sacred texts, religious writings, manuscripts of the Bible and ancient philosophical works, the peaceful environment was crucial for focused work. But just like any place that stores valuable goods, and let's be honest, these books were treasures. The monasteries had their fair share of pests. Rodents, particularly mice and rats, were constant problems, and these creatures posed a real threat to the delicate handwritten manuscripts. A single rat could destroy months or even years of painstaking work. This is where the cat came in. Cats naturally were excellent hunters. Their quiet demeanor, stealthy movements and sharp reflexes made them the perfect guardians for the scriptorium. They could silently prowl between rows of manuscripts and shelves, ensuring that nothing, especially not a rat, got to the precious texts. The monks could focus on their work, transcribing and illuminating the manuscripts, knowing that the cats were on the job. The presence of these feline protectors became almost as essential as the monks themselves. But let's not overlook the spiritual side of things. While cats were clearly useful in terms of pest control, they also symbolized something deeper in the monastery setting. In medieval Christianity, monks often sought to balance their lives of prayer, study and work, but they also sought to live in harmony with the natural world. The cat, in all its quiet grace, fit seamlessly into this environment. It represented the monk's quest for spiritual purity, silent, vigilant and ever watchful, much like the ideal monk should be. The monks themselves likely saw their cats as both practical partners in maintaining the sanctity of their work and as spiritual companions in their pursuit of wisdom. In some ways, the cats may have even been viewed as spiritual guardians, ensuring that the sacred knowledge they were preserving was kept safe from any earthly disruptions, including vermin. A cat's quiet and seemingly mystical nature lent itself to the monastic ideal of silence and contemplation. It wasn't just a rodent catcher, it was part of the peaceful ambience that defined the monastic lifestyle. In fact, many medieval monasteries had cats as permanent residents, almost as if they were members of the monastic community themselves. Just as the monks were devoted to their spiritual duties, the cats were trusted to do their part, guarding the manuscripts, roaming the halls and providing the occasional comfort or companionship to those working in the library. The monks likely appreciated their cats in a way that went beyond mere utility. In these peaceful spaces where intellectual and spiritual pursuits were paramount, the presence of a cat provided a kind of balance. It was as if the cat, with its silent watchfulness, was a symbol of the monastery's deeper values of discipline and vigilance in the pursuit of knowledge. Historians still debate the role of animals, particularly cats, in these medieval spiritual communities. Were they just practical workers, or did they play a more symbolic role in the monastery's spiritual life? Did the cats represent something divine, a silent witness to the work of the monks, or were they simply there to do a job? Some argue that the cat's place in the monastery was not just functional but also emblematic of the monastic pursuit of harmony between the physical and spiritual worlds. Others suggest that the cats were nothing more than employees, albeit very well-loved ones, working to keep the monastery free from pests. Regardless of their symbolic or spiritual role, it's clear that cats were essential to the daily operation of the monasteries. They weren't just companions to the monks, they were helpers, guardians and protectors of the invaluable works being created and preserved. Their role in monastic life was so significant that their presence became intertwined with the very essence of what these monasteries represented, a sanctuary of learning and a safe haven for knowledge. Without their silent contributions, the monks might have faced more distractions, and the knowledge they worked so hard to preserve might have been lost to the ages. In many ways, the role of the cat in the monastery mirrors the work of the monk, quiet, vigilant and dedicated to preserving something far greater than itself. As the monks copied holy texts and transcribed wisdom from the ancients, the cats moved silently through the aisles, ensuring that nothing disturbed the delicate work of intellectual and spiritual preservation. And perhaps in this strange and beautiful coexistence, the monks and cats became partners in the eternal task of safeguarding knowledge. As we delve deeper into the story of these library cats, it's fascinating to think about how their presence in these sacred spaces might have influenced the way knowledge was viewed. Were the cats simply there to chase rats, or did they have a deeper, more profound role in the monastic life? Historians still ponder these questions, and there's no definitive answer. But one thing is clear, the cats of the monasteries were as much a part of the intellectual and spiritual world of the medieval period as the monks themselves. By now you might be wondering, okay, I get it. Cats were mystical, symbolic and useful. But why exactly did they become the ideal workers in medieval libraries? Well, let's break this down. It wasn't just about their cute faces or their mysterious allure. Cats were uniquely suited to library life in a way no other animal was. There were specific reasons why, among all the creatures roaming medieval Europe, the cat was chosen as the library's most reliable companion. For starters, let's talk about the environment. Libraries in the medieval world, particularly those in monasteries, were serious business. These weren't the cozy modern public libraries you might stroll into today. Medieval libraries were places of focused study and preservation of the written word, and that meant these spaces had to be kept clean, quiet and free of distractions. The monks and scribes working there spent hours transcribing sacred texts, working in near-complete silence. A single disturbance, like a mouse nibbling at a manuscript, could ruin a day's or a week's work. So it was crucial to have a guardian who could keep pests at bay while remaining unobtrusive. Enter the cat. Unlike dogs who might bark, run around or create a ruckus, cats were perfectly suited to this delicate, silent environment. Their hunting instincts made them excellent at catching rats and mice, but they also had an extraordinary ability to move through the library without disturbing the peace. Cats are naturally stealthy creatures. They glide silently through rooms, hardly making a sound. When you need a quiet guardian, there's no one better than a cat. Additionally, cats were remarkably independent. They didn't need constant attention or instruction. Unlike dogs who often require training and frequent interaction, cats were content to do their job on their own. Once a cat was introduced to a library, it would instinctively know to patrol the area, hunting down rodents and ensuring the manuscripts were safe. This made cats perfect for libraries where the focus was on preserving knowledge, not maintaining an elaborate training regimen. There's also the fact that cats were low maintenance. Medieval libraries and monasteries were usually isolated and self-sustained, meaning the monks and scribes living there had limited time for anything outside their religious and intellectual duties. The last thing they needed was a demanding pet. Cats, however, were independent creatures who could roam freely, fend for themselves when it came to food, and generally didn't require much care beyond the occasional stroke or a warm corner to curl up in. This made them ideal companions for these busy intellectuals. But there's more. Cats weren't just useful in the practical sense, they also brought a certain elegance to the space. Picture it. Monks hunched over their work, carefully copying sacred texts, while in the background a cat quietly prowls through the aisles of scrolls. Its graceful movements and independent demeanor might have even brought a sense of calm and focus to the environment. The cat wasn't just an animal in the library, it became part of the intellectual and spiritual energy that filled the air. And while they may not have been trained in the same way as dogs, cats had a way of blending into the fabric of the library. Their presence was comforting but unobtrusive. Their very stillness became part of the library's tranquility. There was something almost mystical about their ability to appear and disappear, just as knowledge can be elusive and fleeting. In a place where knowledge and mystery were valued above all, the cat fit right in. Some might argue that it wasn't just their utility that made them perfect for libraries, it was their symbolism. In a world where knowledge was closely tied to religious faith and mystery, cats embodied the ideals of protection, wisdom, and quiet vigilance. They were the ideal protectors for the written word, guarding the sacred texts with a mysterious grace that seemed to mirror the quiet, steady work of the monks themselves. And with the cat's connection to the divine in some parts of Europe, their role in libraries may have been seen as not just functional but spiritually significant as well. Of course, historians still argue over how far this spiritual symbolism really went. Were cats simply there for practical reasons, or did their mystical associations elevate their status in these intellectual spaces? Some scholars point out that the very idea of a cat in a library has a certain symbolic resonance, the silent, watchful creature whose very presence offers protection and insight, much like the work being done in the library itself. Historians still can't quite agree on whether the monks thought of their feline companions as spiritual guardians or just good pest control workers. But no matter which way you look at it, the cat's role in libraries was multidimensional. It wasn't just about keeping the rats at bay, it was about embodying the delicate balance between practical work and mystical protection. Cats also played another important role, they were companions. Monks and scribes worked long hours in the silence of the library. A cat with its silent purring and gentle presence could offer a kind of comfort that was hard to find elsewhere. It wasn't unusual for monks, often living in relative isolation, to form bonds with their animals. Cats, with their quiet companionship, could provide the perfect counterbalance to the loneliness and quietude of monastic life. A monk might spend hours hunched over a manuscript, only to be interrupted by the soft brush of a cat rubbing against his leg. It's hard to imagine that these small quiet moments didn't provide some kind of emotional relief in an otherwise solemn environment. So, as you can see, the cats of medieval libraries weren't just random creatures who happened to wander in. They were an essential part of the ecosystem that allowed these intellectual spaces to thrive. Their combination of practical skills, spiritual symbolism, and quiet companionship made them perfect candidates for library work. The monks and scribes focused on preserving knowledge and spiritual teachings could rest easy knowing that their feline guardians were on the job. It wasn't just a partnership, it was a symbiotic relationship where both the cats and the monks played vital roles in the preservation of wisdom. As we continue this journey into the role of cats in medieval libraries, we can't help but marvel at how these creatures were more than just pets. They were active participants in a process that would shape the intellectual history of Europe for centuries to come. And when you think about it, that's a pretty impressive resume for any cat. Now let's get to the real down and dirty reason why cats were needed in medieval libraries. Yes, as we've already established, cats were revered creatures, symbols of purity, and silent spiritual guardians. But let's not forget the number one practical reason why these libraries and monasteries in particular needed cats, rats, and mice. Those furry little pests weren't just annoying, they were a genuine threat to the preservation of priceless manuscripts. And when you have a valuable collection of ancient hand-copied texts, the last thing you want is for a mouse to nibble its way through a page or a rat to destroy a delicate scroll. This was a major issue, and the humble cat was there to do what it did best: hunt. Medieval libraries were often poorly protected from the natural elements, let alone pests. Picture it, a library full of precious books and manuscripts, many of them meticulously hand-copied over years. These weren't just the texts of commoners, these were often religious works, the lifeblood of society at the time, or documents containing wisdom passed down from the ancient world. Now imagine a rat coming into contact with one of these fragile pages, chewing through the paper, damaging the ink, and leaving an irreplaceable text ruined. If the damage was severe enough, that manuscript could be lost forever. And let's be honest, there was no backup copy for these texts. Once a manuscript was damaged, it was gone for good.
Historians still debate the true scale of this problem, but one thing is clear: the threat of rodents was no small issue. In many medieval libraries, the walls and ceilings were stone, but the floors and windows were often left open or poorly sealed. These libraries weren't exactly Fort Knox. In fact, many were just quiet, humble rooms full of ancient knowledge, easily accessible to pests looking for shelter and food. For a library that housed centuries of intellectual labor, this was a significant risk. Without the constant vigilance of a cat, who knows how many texts would have been lost to these pesky intruders. Now, this might sound a bit dramatic, but it's a real possibility. A single rat could gnaw through a book or scroll in just a few hours. It wasn't just the books that were at risk. The ink used in these manuscripts could also be consumed. Yes, rats and mice love nibbling on parchment, but they also had a penchant for ink, which was often made from natural substances like oak galls or charcoal. A rat that chewed through a book might not only damage the physical manuscript, but also destroy the integrity of the text itself. And in a world without printing presses, a single destroyed manuscript could erase the work of an entire scholar. This is where the cats came in, quietly doing the job that no one else was capable of doing. Unlike humans, who were often distracted or preoccupied with other tasks, cats were natural-born hunters. Their sharp senses, particularly their hearing and eyesight, allowed them to catch rodents where others couldn't. They moved silently and quickly, ensuring that no mice or rats could sneak past them. While the monks and scribes labored over their manuscripts, the cats worked in the background, keeping the libraries safe from the rodents that would have otherwise ravaged these valuable texts. Let's not overlook the other practical reasons why cats were the best candidates for the job. While dogs could be great for guarding monasteries or homes, they weren't nearly as adept at the job that cats excelled at: sneaking around and hunting small creatures in tight spaces. A dog might have barked, chased, or disturbed the quiet work of the monks, but a cat, silent, sleek, and elusive, could slip in and out of the library unnoticed. And since the cats weren't trying to protect anything other than their natural territory, they didn't need much in terms of supervision. They could be trusted to do their work on their own. In fact, the relationship between monks and cats was largely symbiotic. The monks provided food and shelter for the cats, and in return the cats kept the library safe from rats and mice. This meant that the monks could focus on their work without having to worry about pest problems, and the library could continue to serve as a center of learning without the constant threat of destruction from rodents. Over time, the presence of cats became a quiet assurance that the manuscripts would remain intact, protected from the destructive forces of nature. But what about the more romantic side of this? Well, it's not just about pests. The presence of cats in the monastery libraries also had a kind of unspoken significance. They were part of the spiritual ecosystem. Cats, in their quiet, solitary manner, symbolized the stillness and focus that monks strived for in their work. Just as the monks were dedicated to their religious texts, the cats were dedicated to their task, protecting the sacred knowledge stored within those walls. There was a kind of balance to this relationship, with both parties working towards a common goal: the preservation of knowledge for future generations. It's fascinating, really, to think about how these animals fit so seamlessly into the fabric of medieval intellectual life. They weren't just pets, they were silent, effective partners in the preservation of knowledge. And in many ways it was their very presence, quiet, watchful, and efficient, that ensured that libraries could continue to function as centers of learning and wisdom. Of course, some scholars argue that the presence of cats in medieval libraries may have been more symbolic than practical. They were viewed as protectors, yes, but were they really as effective as we think? Could the rodents have been controlled through other means, such as traps or better building maintenance? Historians still debate the degree to which the cats were truly necessary, but the general consensus is that they played an essential role. Whether they were seen as spiritual guardians or just incredibly good at their job, there's no denying that the cats were key players in the preservation of knowledge during the medieval period. When you think about it, the cats were more than just pest controllers. They were the unsung heroes of the medieval library, and without them, who knows how much knowledge might have been lost to time, one rat nibble at a time. Let's now shift our focus to another fascinating aspect of the medieval library: its rules. Monastic libraries were not only places of learning but also places of strict discipline. Monks followed a daily routine that governed nearly every aspect of their lives, and this carried over into how the library was managed. The space was sacred, and the knowledge contained within was not to be taken lightly. There were rules, lots of them, and these rules didn't just apply to the monks and scribes working within the library, they also applied to the cats. Monastic libraries were carefully organized, and the texts within them were extremely valuable. Many of the manuscripts in these libraries were the only surviving copies of ancient texts. Monks worked diligently to copy, transcribe and preserve these documents, and their work was highly controlled. The process of manuscript copying was slow and meticulous, with each monk tasked with ensuring that every letter was perfectly transcribed. This wasn't just about reading or studying, it was about preserving the very essence of intellectual and religious life. A single mistake could render a manuscript useless. This was a high-stakes environment. Now the role of the cat in this setting was vital, but it wasn't without its boundaries. The monks established specific rules for the cats, who were allowed to roam freely within the library but still had to obey certain guidelines. Monks and scribes valued the cat's ability to keep the pests at bay, but they also knew the importance of maintaining order in such a delicate environment. So while the cats were trusted with the responsibility of protecting the manuscripts, they were also expected to behave in ways that wouldn't interfere with the monks' work. For example, it's said that the cats were trained in their own way to avoid damaging the manuscripts. Monks often kept a careful eye on them as they roamed the library, ensuring that they didn't knock over important scrolls or disturb the monks' work. And although the cats were valued members of the monastery's intellectual team, they weren't allowed to roam just anywhere. They had designated areas to patrol, and if a monk saw a cat wandering too close to a stack of books or a newly completed manuscript, they might gently guide it back into the cat-friendly areas. This speaks to the level of order and discipline that governed not just the human inhabitants of the monastery, but also their feline companions. But the discipline of the monastery wasn't just about maintaining the physical space, it was also about maintaining silence. Libraries were places of sacred work, and noise was to be avoided at all costs. Monks believed that silence allowed them to better concentrate on their divine and intellectual work, and the library was the most sacred of spaces in the monastery. The cats, being the independent creatures they were, had to learn to move through the library without disturbing the stillness. This wasn't a difficult task for them. Cats are naturally quiet and graceful, moving through spaces without making a sound. But the library was not the only place where silence was important. In the surrounding scriptorium, where monks carefully transcribed religious texts, silence was considered holy. The very act of copying a text was seen as a form of prayer, and distractions were to be avoided at all costs. In this context, the cats weren't just working animals, they were spiritual companions, helping to maintain the quiet sanctity of the library. Their presence, though constant, was unobtrusive. They didn't bark, they didn't jump around, and they didn't demand attention. They were perfect for the work environment that the monastery required. Their silent movements, always watchful, were as much a part of the library's serenity as the stillness of the monks themselves. One interesting rule was that the cats had to be kept in line with the work schedule. Just like the monks, the cats had to know when it was time to work and when it was time to rest. They were trusted to patrol during the day, but they also had their own rest periods, typically in the warmer parts of the monastery, where they could curl up and sleep after a long day of guarding the manuscripts. This routine, though seemingly simple, reflected the larger structure of the monastery itself, where every task and every being had its place and role. Historians still debate whether the cats were truly trained in any formal sense, or if their behavior was simply a matter of instinct. Some believe that the cats were simply allowed to roam freely, with the monks understanding that their natural hunting instincts would take care of the rodent problem. Others argue that the monks may have taken a more active role in teaching the cats to respect the library's rules, perhaps through a system of rewards or punishments. Either way, the important thing is that the cats understood the gravity of their role. They were more than just pets or symbols of mystery, they were integral to the functioning of the library and the preservation of its manuscripts. One could argue that the relationship between the monks and their cats was a beautiful example of harmony. The monks provided the cats with food, shelter and affection, while the cats in turn helped preserve the priceless manuscripts that were so central to the monastery's mission. Together, they formed a quiet partnership that allowed both the intellectual and spiritual pursuits of the monks to flourish. And while it might seem that the role of the cat was strictly functional, we can't overlook the fact that they also served as a kind of living symbol of the monastery's values. Their silent work in the library echoed the monks' own disciplined lives. Just as the monks labored in silence, focusing on preserving and transmitting knowledge, the cats silently ensured that this knowledge remained safe and protected from the distractions of the outside world. In this way, the cats were more than just hunters, they were silent partners in the monastery's intellectual and spiritual mission.
Now let's move from the practical aspects of cats in medieval libraries to their deeper symbolic meaning. Cats, much like the monks who worked within the monastery, had an air of purity and protection surrounding them. These qualities weren't just random associations, they were integral to the role that cats played in the spiritual world of medieval Europe. Just as cats were valued for their ability to protect books and manuscripts from pests, they were also seen as protectors of something much more abstract, knowledge itself. And the monks, ever the spiritual seekers, couldn't have been more aligned with this idea. At first glance, a cat might seem like an odd choice for a symbol of purity and protection. After all, their independent nature, nocturnal habits, and aloof demeanor seem anything but saintly. But this very independence is precisely what made cats the ideal symbols for the medieval understanding of purity. Cats were solitary creatures, and their independence mirrored the monks' need for individual contemplation and quietude in the pursuit of knowledge. They didn't need to be tethered to anyone or anything, they followed their own path, much like the monk who was committed to a life of solitary devotion to God and intellectual pursuits. But purity wasn't just about silence and solitude, it was also about safeguarding the sacred. In the medieval mindset, knowledge, especially sacred knowledge, was something divine. The preservation of these texts wasn't just an intellectual exercise, it was a spiritual responsibility. Just as monks believed they were keeping divine wisdom alive through their transcription and study, the cats were seen as spiritual guardians of that wisdom. Their presence in the library was viewed as a form of divine protection. They weren't just protecting the manuscripts from rats, they were protecting the sacred knowledge contained within those manuscripts from the corruption of time, pests, and even human negligence. Historians have often debated whether this view of cats was simply a result of their practical role in the library, or if there was a deeper, more mystical significance attached to them. Some scholars argue that the medieval perception of cats as protectors of knowledge was rooted in religious symbolism. In Christianity, there was a strong belief that purity and protection went hand in hand. Just as the Virgin Mary was often depicted as pure and protective, so too were cats viewed as symbols of purity, guardians of the divine knowledge contained in the manuscripts they watched over. And much like the monks who were tasked with guarding the purity of the religious texts, the cats acted as silent sentinels, ensuring that no harm would befall the precious works that the monks so carefully transcribed. But the symbolism of cats didn't stop at purity. Their role as protectors was also tied to the idea of vigilance. In medieval Europe, vigilance was a virtue. It was seen as essential not just in the context of military defense, but also in the preservation of knowledge and the safeguarding of religious truths. Cats, with their sharp instincts and quiet movements, embodied this virtue. They were constantly on alert, keeping watch over the manuscripts, silently ensuring that no pest could destroy the sacred texts. The monks too were tasked with a similar vigilance, guarding their intellectual and spiritual lives, ensuring that the knowledge they were preserving would not be lost or forgotten. It's fascinating to think about how the symbolism of the cat in these settings goes beyond just their physical role. In a way, cats were considered a living embodiment of the ideal qualities that the monks strived for: purity, protection, and vigilance. They were solitary yet attentive, graceful yet formidable. They were silent workers, quietly doing their job without drawing attention to themselves. And perhaps most importantly, they were seen as protectors of the sacred guardians of knowledge that could shape the course of history. There's an old medieval belief that certain animals, especially those that lived alongside humans, were imbued with spiritual significance. Dogs were protectors, yes, but cats had their own unique role in this cosmic order. In many parts of Europe, cats were associated with the moon, the mysterious, ever-present force that governs the night. This connection to the moon further reinforced their status as mystical protectors. In the library, cats weren't just there to guard the manuscripts from pests, they were also there to guard the knowledge from the forces of ignorance, time and decay. Now let's be real for a second. We all know that cats in their natural state can be a little unpredictable. They're not the most obedient creatures. They'll chase a toy for hours, but then completely ignore you when you need them to stop knocking things over. Yet there's something about that wild independence that made them perfect symbols of purity and protection. Their ability to be both calm and fierce, both solitary and social, made them the ideal spiritual guardians for a place as sacred as the medieval library. In fact, the very traits that made cats seem aloof and mysterious also made them fascinating symbols. They weren't easily understood, and that made them even more intriguing. In a world where so much was governed by strict rules, the cat's refusal to conform to societal expectations made them stand out. They didn't need to be tamed, and they didn't need human approval. They were just there, quietly doing their job, and that was exactly what made them so effective at what they did. Their presence was both comforting and enigmatic, a perfect fit for the libraries where monks and scholars sought answers to life's biggest questions. Historians still debate whether the medieval reverence for cats was based on superstition, practical necessity, or a mixture of both. But what is certain is that cats were seen as more than just pets in these intellectual spaces. They were protectors, guardians, and symbols of the virtues that were central to the medieval understanding of knowledge and wisdom. Whether they were keeping the rats away or symbolizing the pure vigilance of the monks, the cats of the medieval library were an essential part of the intellectual and spiritual ecosystem that defined the time. As we continue our exploration of the medieval library, let's dive into something a little more mystical: the relationship between cats and books. It wasn't just their ability to guard precious manuscripts or their symbolic status as protectors that made them integral to these intellectual spaces. Cats throughout medieval culture were often seen as mystical creatures, possessing a deep connection to the unknown, to the supernatural, and even to the divine. In fact, some scholars believe that the presence of cats in libraries wasn't just for their practical use in pest control, but also because they were believed to have a special, almost magical relationship with books. Let's take a moment to consider the world of medieval spirituality. In an age where knowledge was both revered and feared, books were seen as more than just vessels of information. They were sacred objects. The texts housed in the monastery libraries weren't just collections of words and ideas, they were considered powerful, almost divine. The monks and scribes who transcribed them weren't merely copying text, they were transferring the sacred wisdom of the ages onto parchment, ensuring its survival for future generations. The manuscripts held in these libraries weren't just valuable, they were precious, imbued with a kind of sanctity that transcended the physical. Enter the cat. As mysterious creatures that had been tied to spiritual and supernatural realms for centuries, cats were believed to have an almost mystical relationship with knowledge. In medieval Europe, where superstition was rampant, cats were often associated with the divine, the magical, and the occult. Cats' natural grace, their quiet, almost eerie movements, and their apparent ability to sneak around undetected, contributed to their reputation as creatures of mystery. They were often believed to have a sixth sense, an ability to perceive things that humans couldn't. This connection to the mystical, in turn, made them the perfect guardians for sacred spaces filled with knowledge. The symbolism is clear: just as cats were associated with mystical forces, so were books. Books were the carriers of knowledge, the keepers of wisdom that had been passed down through the ages, and in the same way, cats were believed to hold the key to hidden knowledge, their very presence in the library, lending an air of mystery and power. The relationship between cats and books wasn't just one of protection, it was one of guardianship, a mystical bond that ensured the survival of the knowledge contained within them. But this isn't just a romanticized idea. Let's think about the practicalities again. Cats' behavior, in many ways, mirrored the careful, deliberate actions of the monks who transcribed the manuscripts. Just as the monks had to be precise, focused, and diligent in their work, the cats were equally attentive, patrolling the library with an almost meditative stillness. Cats didn't just chase pests for the sake of it, they did so with purpose, as though they were protecting something far more valuable than a piece of food or a scrap of paper. This mystical connection between cats and books was woven into the very fabric of the medieval library. Now, let's bring in another layer. In medieval art and literature, cats were often depicted as guardians of knowledge. They were seen as creatures of both mystery and intellect, able to navigate the intellectual and spiritual realms with ease. In many medieval texts, cats were described as wise beings, capable of understanding secrets that were hidden from ordinary mortals. They were creatures of silence, stealth, and grace, qualities that made them the perfect companions for the monks who worked in the library. And as the monks copied and transcribed ancient texts, it's easy to imagine how the cats with their quiet movements and their watchful eyes were seen as the perfect keepers of these sacred works. In some medieval legends and stories, cats were believed to have special knowledge or insight. There were tales of cats that could read, understand, or even influence the outcome of events. Whether this was a product of superstition or a reflection of the cat's role as a companion to the intellectuals of the time is hard to say, but it's clear that cats were woven into the cultural fabric in ways that went beyond simple companionship. They were considered vessels of wisdom, sometimes even possessing supernatural powers. This perception wasn't limited to religious texts, it extended to all forms of knowledge. Books, as objects of wisdom, were inherently tied to the idea of the mystical and divine, and the cats that guarded them were seen as participants in the preservation of this hidden knowledge. Historians still debate whether these mystical associations were the result of superstition or whether they were a reflection of the deep respect and reverence that medieval society had for the written word. Were the cats truly seen as protectors of knowledge, or was their relationship with books more about their utility as pest controllers? Some argue that the association between cats and mystical knowledge was simply a way to elevate their status in society, turning them into more than just animals. Others believe that cats' natural stealth and grace lent them a sense of divine power and importance, elevating their role in the library to something much more profound than just that of a pest controller. But one thing is clear, cats in medieval libraries were not just there to chase rats. They were believed to be protectors of something far more precious, the written word, which was considered the key to divine knowledge. And in this sacred environment, where every manuscript was carefully crafted and every piece of knowledge preserved for posterity, the cat was a fitting guardian. Whether as a practical protector or a mystical figure, the cat's role in these libraries was far more significant than we might first imagine. In some ways, the cat's relationship with books and knowledge mirrors the role of the library itself, a space of mystery, a place where secrets are kept, and where wisdom is both sought and protected. Cats with their quiet demeanor and watchful eyes were the perfect sentinels for these spaces of learning. And in their watchfulness, they became not just guardians of the library, but also symbols of the profound connection between knowledge, mystery, and the divine. Now, let's step into the quiet, behind-the-scenes world of the library cats. While we've talked a lot about their role as protectors and symbols of purity, there's more to their lives than just guarding manuscripts. Ever wondered what these feline guardians were actually doing when they weren't prowling the library for rodents? Sure, they had their tasks, but like any cat, they had their moments of mischief, rest, and dare I say, daydreaming. In medieval libraries, cats didn't simply sit around all day waiting for the next mouse to scamper by. These were complex, multi-dimensional creatures, each with its own habits and routines. While the monks and scribes worked diligently on their manuscripts, the cats had their own unique rhythm, pacing between shelves and curling up in the warm corners of the library. They could be found lounging in spots where the sunlight streamed through small, high windows, turning the stone floors into pools of warmth. Imagine it, a monk, bent over his work, and a cat, lazily blinking in the sun, curled up beside a stack of books. It wasn't just about pest control, it was about creating a space where both intellect and serenity could thrive. But of course, the cats were far from idle. They had a job to do, and they took it seriously. When the moon rose and the lights dimmed, the library took on a different character. The cats would shift into full hunter mode, their movements quieter and more purposeful. While the monks slept or prayed, the cats patrolled the aisles and stacks of books, silently checking for intruders. These were no casual strolls, they were full-fledged hunting expeditions, their sleek bodies weaving through the library's labyrinth of shelves. A rat scurrying in the corner, gone in a flash. A mouse making its way through the papery terrain, a cat was on it in an instant. Historians still argue whether these cats were truly working full-time, or whether their hours were more flexible. After all, cats are notorious for their love of naps, and it's hard to imagine that every minute of a cat's day was spent on diligent patrol. Some believe that the cat's involvement in library life was more passive, that they simply kept the place safe during the day and night, without anyone specifically directing their actions.
In a way, the cats were the ultimate independent workers, doing their jobs without much interference, almost like a quiet partner in the intellectual environment of the monastery. While their work was essential, the cats also had moments of playfulness. They weren't all serious business. Picture it, a monk, hunched over his desk, quill in hand, transcribing the next line of scripture. In the background, a cat, perhaps the same one that had just spent hours patrolling the aisles, chasing a bit of string or pouncing on a dust mote. The contrast between the monk's focused attention on the sacred text and the cat's spontaneous frolicking in the quiet space must have been amusing. And while the monks may have been somewhat distracted, their cats also brought an element of lightness to what would otherwise be a rather intense and solitary atmosphere. Even though the cats had a job to do, their lives in the library were also about companionship, comfort, and the occasional bit of entertainment. When the monks were having moments of respite, it's likely that some of them found comfort in the presence of their feline companions. Cats, with their low rumbling purrs and soft fur, could offer the monks a moment of relaxation, even if just for a few minutes between their intense bouts of work. It's easy to imagine a monk, after hours of copying a difficult manuscript, running his fingers through a cat's fur as a way of unwinding. In the stillness of the library, these small interactions would have been more than just comforting, they would have been spiritually rejuvenating. But let's not forget the occasional mischief. A cat's curiosity is well known, and libraries, particularly those filled with ancient priceless manuscripts, were full of potential distractions. Historians still love to speculate about how often the cats may have knocked over a stack of books or swatted at a newly transcribed manuscript, perhaps smudging the ink with their paws. Some stories even suggest that cats were known to sneak under the monks' desks, curling up on piles of parchment, or in between shelves. You might think this was disruptive, but it's possible the monks accepted this behavior as part of the charm of having these creatures around. In fact, some may have found it endearing. After all, in a world where silence and discipline were key, the playful antics of a cat might have provided the kind of balance the monks needed. Even with their playful and occasionally mischievous behavior, the cats were never far from their primary purpose, protecting the library. It's easy to imagine that, when the library was quiet and everyone else had gone to bed, the cats would take up their silent post, carefully patrolling the aisles of ancient texts, making sure no rodents were daring to breach the sanctity of the space. Their diligence, however quiet, was essential to the library's functioning. And their mystique, combined with the gentle purring that likely echoed softly through the stone walls, would have added an almost spiritual aura to the space. Some historians argue that this silent, almost mystical role was central to the medieval library's ambience. The library wasn't just a space for reading and copying manuscripts, it was a sanctuary, a place where intellect and spirituality came together. The cats, with their silent movements and aloof elegance, were the perfect guardians for these sacred texts. They didn't just protect the books, they added a layer of atmosphere, making the library feel even more sacred, even more otherworldly. So while the monks were busy transcribing the divine and intellectual knowledge of their time, the cats were doing their part in their own quiet, mysterious way. Whether hunting rats, curling up for a nap, or causing a little mischief, their presence was essential to the library's success. And as you imagine this scene, picture the monks working diligently, their quills scratching across parchment, while their feline companions quietly moved through the space, keeping it safe and serene. As we continue to unravel the role of cats in medieval libraries, it's impossible to ignore the rich layer of folklore and superstition that shrouded these enigmatic creatures. Cats were not just seen as physical protectors of manuscripts, they also carried deep symbolic weight, woven into the very fabric of medieval belief systems. In a world rife with legends and myth, the presence of cats in libraries wasn't just about keeping pests away, it was about embodying a deeper spiritual protection. Throughout medieval Europe, cats were frequently linked to mystical realms. Their connection to the supernatural, as silent and mysterious creatures, made them perfect protectors, not just of knowledge, but also of the sacred spaces in which knowledge was kept. It's not surprising that, in the quiet corners of monasteries, where monks dedicated themselves to spiritual and intellectual pursuits, cats were revered almost like guardians of the divine. In medieval folklore, cats were often seen as creatures with unique powers. The idea that they could see things beyond the human realm, whether that be the unseen spirits or the subtle hidden meanings of life, made them supernatural beings in the eyes of many. Cats, particularly black ones, were sometimes believed to possess magical abilities. In some cultures, they were seen as protectors of the home, warding off evil spirits and ensuring that no harm came to the family or sacred objects. In the case of the library, this meant not only safeguarding the physical manuscripts, but also ensuring the preservation of the knowledge and wisdom contained within them. One of the most interesting aspects of this folklore is the connection between cats and the divine. In medieval times, the presence of cats in a space like a library was often thought to be a sign that the space was blessed. Their vigilance, their quiet movements, and their role as protectors were seen as divine in nature. Some believed that the cat's role in the library was to maintain a sort of spiritual balance. Their ability to patrol silently, without disturbing the monks or scribes, made them perfect for guarding the sacred work. They weren't just pets or workers in the conventional sense, they were seen as mystical entities, playing an integral part in ensuring that the knowledge they were guarding remained pure, untarnished and protected. But the mystical connection between cats and libraries didn't stop at the intellectual level. Cats were also seen as keepers of hidden knowledge. The medieval world was full of mysticism and alchemy, and libraries were the places where much of this esoteric knowledge was stored. In some traditions, cats were thought to be able to access secret, hidden realms of knowledge. They were believed to have the ability to understand the mysterious languages of the occult and the divine, making them ideal companions for the monks who worked in these libraries. In fact, some even speculated that a cat's presence could enhance the intellectual clarity of the work being done. The very act of transcribing holy texts or ancient philosophies was made sacred by the cat's silent company. Historians still debate whether the role of cats in medieval libraries was purely practical, or if there was truly a deeper spiritual connection. Were they simply there to keep the rats away, or were they something more? While some argue that the belief in cats' mystical powers was just a form of superstition, others claim that it was an essential part of the medieval worldview. In a time when everything had spiritual significance, even the presence of a cat was thought to be infused with divine meaning. Whether consciously or unconsciously, the monks and scribes may have seen their feline companions as guardians, not only of the manuscripts, but also of the sacred knowledge contained within them. Interestingly, the idea of the cat as a protector of knowledge wasn't limited to the medieval period. In fact, cats' mystical associations continued to evolve through history. In later centuries, they would be seen as symbols of wisdom and mystery, playing a role in literature, art, and culture as protectors of the unknown and the hidden. In the context of the medieval library, however, their role was intimately tied to the very survival of knowledge itself. The cats didn't just protect books, they were part of the ongoing effort to preserve and safeguard the intellectual and spiritual legacy of humanity. As we think about the folklore surrounding these library cats, it's hard not to get caught up in the romanticized idea that these creatures were in some sense magical. Their connection to the divine, their role as silent guardians, and their ability to move with grace and stealth made them seem like living embodiments of the spiritual world. Cats, with their aloof demeanor and their mysterious aura, fit perfectly into a world where the boundaries between the earthly and the divine were often blurred. They were the perfect companions for the monks who spent their days transcribing the holy and the sacred. In this way, the cats weren't just part of the physical preservation of knowledge, they were part of its spiritual protection as well. The folklore surrounding these library cats also points to something even more profound, the idea that knowledge itself is a living, breathing entity that needs to be protected, nurtured, and preserved. In a time when books and manuscripts were among the most valuable possessions, the idea that a cat could serve as a protector of these treasures speaks to the immense importance that was placed on knowledge. Whether mystical or practical, the cat's role in this endeavor was sacred. It wasn't just about keeping rats at bay, it was about ensuring that the wisdom of the past could survive, grow, and continue to inspire future generations. As we continue to reflect on the role of the silent, watchful protectors in the library, we begin to see that the cat's place in medieval society was far from trivial. They were integral to the preservation of intellectual and spiritual life. And through the lens of folklore, it becomes clear that they were more than just animals. They were symbols of a deeper connection to the divine, the mystical, and the eternal. Now, let's peel back another layer of the medieval library cat mystery, their role in the day-to-day work of the scribes. While we've been focusing on their primary job of guarding against pests and serving as spiritual protectors, there was another less obvious aspect to the library cat's duties. They weren't just passive observers in these intellectual spaces. Cats had a more subtle, almost invisible, influence on the work of the monks and scribes. Though we may never know the full extent of their impact, there's something undeniably intriguing about the idea that these quiet, watchful creatures played a role in the flow of intellectual labor. Let's set the scene for a moment. Picture the monastery scriptorium, a dimly lit room filled with the sound of quills scratching on parchment. The monks sit hunched over their manuscripts, transcribing holy texts with painstaking precision. Each letter, each word, must be perfect, for any mistake could destroy the integrity of the manuscript. These scribes lived in an environment of intense focus and concentration. The work was grueling, and the texts were sacred. To make a mistake could mean divine retribution. So, the monks and scribes poured all their energy into their craft, but they weren't alone. Often, they were accompanied by their feline companions, who in their quiet, unobtrusive way, may have contributed to the intellectual energy of the room. While the cat's primary role was practical, keeping rats and mice away, there's a quieter, more subtle job that they filled, providing emotional and intellectual support. In a room where silence was sacred and focus was everything, the cats provided a unique form of companionship. They didn't interrupt the monk's work, but their presence had a calming effect. The sound of a cat's purring in the corner might have been a gentle reassurance to the monk, a reminder that the world outside the scriptorium was still and serene. Cats have a way of creating a peaceful atmosphere, and in a setting where concentration was paramount, this peaceful presence might have allowed the monks to stay focused longer and work more efficiently. But the cat's role wasn't limited to emotional support. There's something to be said for the way cats interacted with the environment itself. Cats have a natural sense of balance. They're graceful creatures, moving with precision and in many ways they mirrored the monks' approach to their work, delicate, focused, and meticulous. The monks didn't have the luxury of distractions. Their world was full of pressure and discipline. But the cats, with their quiet steps and intuitive movements, were a reminder of the calm, controlled energy that permeated the monastery. It was as if the cats were silently demonstrating the very qualities the monks sought to embody in their own work. Imagine a monk, deep in concentration, his quill poised over parchment, copying an ancient text. The cat, ever watchful, prowls through the room, its movements fluid and graceful. There's a moment of stillness in the air, as the monk's eyes flicker briefly to the cat, catching sight of its calm, focused demeanor. Perhaps it was a brief moment of connection between the monk and the cat, a reminder that their work, like the cat's, required patience, focus and precision. This quiet shared presence might have provided a subtle form of inspiration, an unspoken reminder of the dedication and discipline required to protect the sacred texts they were transcribing.
Historians still debate whether this sort of influence was intentional or merely a byproduct of the relationship between monks and their cats. Was the presence of the cat in the scriptorium a form of emotional support, or was it more about creating an environment that allowed the monks to work at their best? While we can't know for sure, there's something beautifully intuitive about the idea that the cat's silent companionship served as a reminder of the larger mission at play. The work of the monks was sacred, and the cat's role in that space, both as a protector and a calming presence, was equally significant. There's also the idea that the cat's natural instincts contributed to the monks' work in other ways. Cats are often incredibly focused creatures, and their ability to observe, stalk, and pounce with precision might have mirrored the way monks focused on their texts. Cats, always alert, always aware of their surroundings, seem to embody the same sort of vigilance that the monks sought in their intellectual and spiritual practices. The cats weren't merely passive animals, they were participants in the intellectual and spiritual environment of the library. This partnership between the monk and the cat, based on mutual respect and quiet focus, wasn't just practical, it was spiritual as well. The monk's commitment to preserving knowledge wasn't solely about physical manuscripts, it was about the spiritual duty of keeping ancient wisdom alive. In many ways, the cats were a part of this sacred task. They weren't just guarding the manuscripts, they were helping to create an environment that allowed the monks to perform their work at the highest level. The stillness and focus that the cats brought into the room were an integral part of the monastery's intellectual and spiritual mission. In fact, the cat's ability to move gracefully through the library and scriptorium might have even been a reminder to the monks that their work too required grace and precision. They had to move carefully, consider each word they transcribed, and honor the sacredness of the texts they were copying. The monks, in their dedication to preserving the wisdom of the past, may have found inspiration in the cat's graceful movements, its ability to remain focused and calm, even when the world around it was chaotic. And while this connection between monk and cat might seem small, it speaks volumes about the way these two beings were intertwined in the larger process of intellectual and spiritual preservation. The cats weren't just passive animals living in the monastery, they were active participants in the work of the library, contributing to the preservation of knowledge through their quiet, steadfast presence. Whether it was through guarding manuscripts, offering companionship, or simply providing a model of grace and focus, the cats played an unseen but indispensable role in the intellectual life of the medieval period. Historians still argue over the true extent of the cat's role in the work of the scribe. Was it symbolic, emotional, or practical? Did the cats truly help with the intellectual work of the monks, or were they just there for companionship and pest control? While we may never fully understand the depth of the cat's influence, what is clear is that their role in the library was far more than just keeping pests at bay. They were a constant silent presence, offering support and contributing to the sacred work that took place within the walls of the medieval library. As we dive deeper into the medieval world of cats in libraries, let's now turn our attention to an often overlooked aspect: how these revered creatures were cared for in such sacred spaces. In an environment where every manuscript was treated with reverence, it's no surprise that the cats in medieval libraries and monasteries were also given special treatment. They were more than just pest controllers, they were symbols of purity and protectors of divine knowledge. And in a world where monks lived by strict codes of discipline and devotion, the care of these feline companions was no less serious or sacred. To begin with, the monks who lived and worked in monasteries followed a strict daily routine that included hours of prayer, work and study. But they didn't work alone, they had their feline companions with them, moving silently between the aisles of manuscripts and curling up in the warm corners of the library. These cats weren't just ignored or left to their own devices, they were cared for and treated as integral members of the community. The monks understood that the cats played an essential role in preserving the library's sanctity, so they took it upon themselves to ensure that these creatures were properly fed, sheltered and cared for. It's easy to imagine that in the medieval world, cats had a somewhat different status compared to today. They weren't seen as household pets necessarily, but as working animals, yet they were still treated with respect. The monks didn't just see them as useful tools for pest control, they likely saw them as companions, providing a sense of comfort and tranquility in an otherwise silent, disciplined environment. Monks who lived relatively austere lives often didn't have many distractions or sources of comfort. The presence of a cat, quiet, watchful and serene, provided something soothing, something natural to break the monotony of daily work. The care of these cats was rooted in practicality. Cats were after all natural hunters, and their presence was vital to the safety of the manuscripts. But beyond that, they were kept in the same structured and methodical environment as the monks themselves. The monks were likely to feed their cats scraps from their own meals, ensuring that the cats were well nourished. As much as the monks adhered to a strict diet, the cats followed a simpler but equally cared-for regimen. Monasteries often had their own gardens and stores of food, and cats would likely have been provided with whatever scraps and leftovers could be spared. The monks took pride in keeping their environment orderly, and the cats were no exception to this rule. In addition to food, the cats were given shelter. Unlike the modern world where cats often have free rein over homes and apartments, the medieval library cats were probably provided with specific places to rest. Think of the warm stone floors of the library, or perhaps the cozy corners of the monastery. Cats as independent creatures didn't require much in terms of shelter, but they would have been given space to sleep and relax in the library or scriptorium, especially after a long day of hunting rodents or keeping watch over the manuscripts. The monks likely ensured that these spaces were safe, warm and comfortable, ideal for a cat's quiet, solitary nature. But what about their health? While we may take for granted the modern understanding of animal care, medieval monks didn't have the benefit of veterinary medicine. Yet, it's possible that the monks had some rudimentary understanding of animal health. If a cat became sick or injured, it's likely that the monks would have done what they could to care for it. Given their reverence for all living things, particularly animals that played a role in their daily work, the monks may have done their best to tend to the needs of their feline companions. Herbal remedies, traditional healing practices, and natural medicines could have been used to treat injuries or illnesses. While the monks may not have had the scientific knowledge we have today, they had an instinctive understanding of the need to care for their animals. Additionally, it's likely that cats were treated with a level of respect that matched their symbolic importance. Cats in medieval times were seen not just as companions but as divine protectors. Their role in the monastery wasn't just about practicality, it was also about spirituality. To treat a cat with kindness and care was a way of honoring the sacred work that the monks were doing. A healthy, well-cared-for cat was, in a way, an extension of the purity and order that the monks strove to maintain in the monastery. In some ways, the care of the cats mirrored the monks' devotion to their work. Just as the monks took great care in copying and preserving the manuscripts, they also took care in nurturing their animal companions. The monks and the cats shared a common purpose, to preserve and protect something much larger than themselves. The cats in turn played an active role in ensuring that the intellectual and spiritual work of the monks could be carried out without disruption. Historians still debate whether the monks viewed the cats in purely utilitarian terms, or if they saw them as sacred beings deserving of the same reverence given to their manuscripts. Was the cat merely a practical tool for pest control, or did it hold a higher spiritual significance in the monastery's world? The truth is probably a combination of both. Cats as essential workers were certainly valued for their ability to protect the manuscripts, but it's hard to ignore the spiritual symbolism that surrounded them. They were creatures of mystery, guardians of knowledge and silent companions to the monks. In this way, the care of the cats was as much a part of the monks' spiritual practice as their work with the manuscripts themselves. In the end, the care of the cats in the monastery was not just a matter of feeding and sheltering them. It was about honoring their role in preserving knowledge, ensuring that these animals, like the monks themselves, played an essential part in the monastery's intellectual and spiritual mission. The cats weren't just working animals, they were participants in a larger spiritual endeavor, and their care reflected the reverence and respect the monks had for all creatures, great and small. Now, as we continue unraveling the story of medieval cats in libraries, we have to address a question that historians and scholars still love to debate. Were cats truly effective at pest control, or were they just a charming and symbolic presence in the library? This is one of those questions that lingers often in the background, as we marvel at the cat's role in these intellectual spaces. Sure, cats were widely regarded as skilled hunters, but were they the best choice for keeping the manuscripts safe from rats and mice? Let's explore both sides of this argument. On the one hand, there's no denying that cats are natural-born hunters. Their stealthy movements, sharp claws, and excellent vision make them highly effective at catching small prey. In fact, the ability of cats to control rodent populations is something that has been celebrated for centuries. Cats are instinctively driven to hunt, and their presence in a space like a medieval library would undoubtedly have helped keep the rat and mouse population in check. This would have been especially important in monasteries and libraries, where food stores, manuscripts and precious texts were at risk of being destroyed by hungry rodents. In that sense, cats were doing exactly what they were born to do, protecting valuable resources. Historians and animal behaviorists agree that cats' hunting instincts are incredibly strong. Cats have a natural ability to catch small creatures, particularly rodents, using their sharp senses and quick reflexes. They don't need training or encouragement. It's in their nature to hunt and kill. And in the context of a library, where preserving knowledge was paramount, a cat's ability to take out a rat or mouse could save a priceless manuscript from damage. The value of that protection cannot be overstated. Without cats in the library, these vulnerable manuscripts may have faced even greater threats than just the wear and tear of time. But here's where the debate gets interesting. Were cats the most effective choice for pest control, or were there other methods that might have been just as good, if not better? Some historians suggest that the role of cats as pest controllers has been somewhat romanticized. While cats are certainly excellent at catching smaller rodents like mice, rats are a different beast entirely. Rats are often more aggressive and can be harder to catch. In some cases, it's possible that the cats, no matter how skilled, weren't as effective at controlling rat populations as people may have thought. After all, even the best trained cat can't be everywhere at once, and rats can be elusive, often finding places to hide in corners and crevices where the cat may not reach. In fact, some argue that other forms of pest control might have been more reliable. For example, monks could have used traps or other methods to catch rodents. There's evidence to suggest that various forms of rodent traps were common in the medieval period, and some monasteries may have employed them alongside their resident cats. Monks and scribes were resourceful, and if one method didn't work, they would likely have tried others. The monks were also skilled in the art of maintaining their physical environment, ensuring that their libraries were as secure as possible. So could the cats have been more of a symbolic gesture, an extra layer of protection, rather than the main pest control force? Historians still argue about this. Another interesting wrinkle in this debate is the fact that not all monasteries and libraries had cats, or at least not as consistently as others. In some areas, cats may have been viewed with suspicion, especially in regions where their association with witches and the supernatural was strong. As we've discussed earlier, some medieval cultures feared cats, particularly black cats, because of their ties to witchcraft. In places where cats were banned or avoided, monks might have relied more heavily on traps, poison, or even dogs to keep pests in check. Yet the historical evidence seems to suggest that, even if cats weren't the sole means of pest control, they were certainly an important part of the system. Some libraries and monasteries had several cats, and they were often considered part of the community. The fact that the cats were allowed to roam freely through the library and scriptorium suggests that they were trusted and valued. The monks may have seen them not just as pest controllers, but as guardians of the sacred work being done. They were creatures that symbolized purity, protection, and vigilance, and perhaps this belief in their symbolic power added to their perceived effectiveness. Still, some scholars insist that the cat's practical role in pest control has been exaggerated. They point to the possibility that rats and mice were still a problem, even with cats around. Monks, ever diligent, would have noticed if rodents continued to damage manuscripts, and they may have turned to other solutions when cats weren't enough. Perhaps this explains the persistence of traps and other methods of pest control alongside the feline guardians. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. Cats were undoubtedly useful in keeping the rodent population in check, but they weren't infallible. They may have been an extra layer of protection, helping to reduce the impact of pests, but they were likely not the only solution. This doesn't take away from their importance, however. Even if their effectiveness wasn't absolute, the cats still played a crucial role in the library ecosystem. They were part of the atmosphere, the mystique, and the spiritual protection of the space. And their very presence, regardless of how many mice they actually caught, provided a sense of security and balance that was essential to the monks' work. Historians still argue over the precise role of cats in medieval libraries, and this debate isn't likely to be resolved anytime soon. Were they the ultimate pest control agents, or were they simply an added comfort and charm to the library? Were they revered for their practical skills, or was their role more symbolic than we realize? As we continue to explore the relationship between cats and libraries, it's clear that their contribution to the preservation of knowledge goes beyond just keeping pests at bay. They were part of a much larger story, one of mysticism, symbolism, and quiet guardianship of the intellectual and spiritual life of the time. By now, we've established the importance of cats in medieval libraries and their integral role in preserving manuscripts, both literally and symbolically. But as with all things, the role of the library cat began to decline as time passed. The medieval period eventually gave way to the Renaissance and the early modern era, and with it, the role of cats in libraries shifted dramatically. How did we go from cats as silent guardians of knowledge to the more standardized, less mystical world of modern libraries? Let's delve into the reasons behind the decline of cats in these sacred spaces. One of the primary factors in the decline of cats in libraries was the changing perception of animals in the early modern period. As Europe transitioned from the medieval mindset, where superstition and religious symbolism were dominant, to a more rational and scientific outlook, the mystical and spiritual associations with animals like cats began to wane. The Enlightenment brought a shift in thought that emphasized reason, science, and the advancement of human knowledge.
In this new intellectual environment, animals were increasingly seen as creatures to be studied scientifically rather than spiritually revered. The cat, which had once been seen as a mystical protector of knowledge, was now viewed through a more utilitarian lens. It wasn't just about the symbolism of the cat anymore, it was about whether the cat could serve a practical function. The Enlightenment also brought about changes in the way libraries were organized and maintained. With the rise of public libraries, the primary focus shifted from the preservation of ancient manuscripts to the dissemination of knowledge. The physical space of the library began to change as well. Libraries became more accessible to the public, with books becoming more widely available and printing technologies improving. The need for a guardian animal like the cat diminished as libraries became more organized and professionalized. The pests that once plagued medieval libraries, rats, mice, and other rodents, were less of a threat in the more controlled modern library environment. Interestingly, this shift wasn't just about the physical and intellectual changes taking place. It also had to do with cultural attitudes toward animals. As society became more urbanized and industrialized, the role of animals in everyday life began to change. No longer confined to rural settings or religious communities, animals were increasingly viewed as pets or commodities. In this new worldview, the cat's role as a guardian of sacred knowledge seemed increasingly irrelevant. Cats, which had once been respected for their hunting skills and spiritual associations, became more of a domestic creature, relegated to the role of a household pet rather than a revered protector of intellectual spaces. By the time the 17th and 18th centuries rolled around, the presence of cats in libraries became less common. They were replaced by more practical means of pest control, such as traps, poison, and the increased cleanliness of library spaces. As books became more mass-produced and less rare, the need for a creature whose primary function was to protect manuscripts dwindled. In fact, as libraries became more institutionalized, animals of any kind were often seen as disruptive to the scholarly environment. The quiet, solitary atmosphere that had once been so crucial to the functioning of the library was now at odds with the presence of an animal, no matter how revered. The decline of cats in libraries also coincided with a shift in the structure and purpose of libraries. In medieval times, libraries were places of intense study, spiritual reflection, and the preservation of sacred knowledge. But with the rise of secular learning, the role of the library began to change. It became a space not just for preserving ancient texts but for actively disseminating knowledge. The emphasis shifted from the quiet, contemplative space of the medieval library to the more bustling, open spaces of public libraries, where access to knowledge was democratized. The idea of a cat as a mystical or spiritual protector didn't quite fit into this new, more rational framework. Still, it's important to acknowledge that not all libraries abandoned their feline residents entirely. There were some libraries, particularly in more rural or religious communities, that continued to house cats for their pest control abilities. But the widespread, almost symbolic role of cats in libraries was undeniably fading. Cats, once seen as the silent guardians of knowledge, were now seen more as companions or household pets, far removed from their mystical role in the sacred spaces of medieval Europe. What's fascinating, though, is that despite the decline of the library cat, their symbolic legacy continues to this day. The cat remains a powerful symbol of knowledge, mystery, and independence. In modern times, the image of the cat in the library has taken on new meanings. Cats are still associated with libraries in literature and pop culture, often as mysterious or scholarly creatures. Think of the cats that appear in children's books or the famous cat in the library trope that continues to capture our imaginations. Cats, even in the 21st century, continue to evoke the same sense of mystery and wisdom they once had in medieval libraries. Historians still debate why the role of cats in libraries declined. Was it the rise of scientific rationalism, the transformation of libraries into public institutions, or was it simply a natural evolution as society and its intellectual pursuits changed? The answer is likely a combination of all of these factors. However, one thing is certain: the legacy of the medieval library cat endures, and its symbolic connection to knowledge, mystery, and protection remains as strong as ever. As we reflect on this shift, it's a reminder that the world of libraries, like the world of knowledge, is constantly evolving. What was once sacred and mystical becomes practical, and what was once practical is eventually viewed through a more symbolic lens. The cat, though no longer a resident of most libraries, remains an enduring symbol of the quiet guardianship of knowledge. Their role may have changed, but the respect for these graceful, mysterious creatures hasn't waned. And who knows, perhaps in some hidden corner of a library, a cat is still watching over the manuscripts, guarding them as silently as ever. As we continue to trace the historical journey of the humble library cat, we must look at one of the most pivotal transitions in intellectual history, the rise of universities in medieval Europe. These institutions of higher learning weren't just places for scholarly pursuit, they became the new centers of knowledge, intellectual discourse, and the preservation of learning. And as we know by now, where knowledge flourished, cats weren't far behind. By the 12th century, the first European universities had begun to emerge, centered in cities like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford. These universities were distinct from the monasteries and abbeys of earlier times. Monasteries were primarily religious and focused on the preservation of sacred texts and spiritual knowledge. In contrast, universities were more secular in their scope, focusing on subjects like philosophy, law, medicine, and the arts, alongside religious studies. They were places of public learning and intellectual exchange, places where scholars gathered to teach and debate the ideas of the day. As universities grew in importance and influence, so did the role of cats within their walls. Just as in monasteries, universities required spaces for the preservation of knowledge. The university's libraries, often housed in the same buildings as lecture halls and study rooms, were dedicated to housing the growing collection of scholarly texts. With the increase in the number of students and the influx of new knowledge, the need to protect these texts from pests, rats, and mice became just as important. This is where cats, always on the front lines of pest control, continued to serve their essential purpose. While universities did not always adhere to the strict codes of discipline that governed monastic libraries, the intellectual atmosphere still required a certain level of order. Cats once again became the quiet sentinels of these libraries. They roamed the halls, keeping an eye on the growing stacks of books, ensuring that rodents stayed out of the way of important works. The cat's presence wasn't just about guarding books, they helped maintain a sense of calm and serenity in spaces that were often bustling with students and professors, the echoes of their debates filling the air. Historians still debate whether the relationship between cats and universities was simply functional, or if, like in monasteries, there was a deeper symbolic connection. In some cases, universities may have adopted cats more out of practical necessity than mystical reverence. Yet, even in these academic spaces, cats began to take on a somewhat symbolic role. They were not just protectors of knowledge, they became symbols of the intellectual pursuit itself. Their independence, curiosity, and quiet determination reflected the qualities that scholars prized in themselves. Cats, much like the scholars they shared their spaces with, had a mysterious, almost otherworldly quality. Their silent, watchful presence seemed to suggest that the pursuit of knowledge was both a solitary and communal endeavor. Interestingly, while the presence of cats in universities was widely accepted, they were not always as revered as they had been in the monasteries. As universities evolved into more secular institutions, the spiritual and symbolic significance of the cat diminished. No longer seen as protectors of divine knowledge, the cats of the university era became more like the practical workers they had always been, guardians of the library's valuable resources. Yet, the symbolic connection between the cat and the intellectual world remained. Cats were still seen as creatures of mystery and knowledge, embodying the same qualities that made them ideal companions for scholars. In some ways, the role of the cat in universities also reflected the changing nature of intellectual life. Universities were places of reason and logic, where the exchange of ideas was central to their purpose. Cats, with their quiet, independent nature, fit well into this environment. They didn't need to be trained or directed, they simply did their job, keeping the rats and mice at bay, while scholars focused on their work. This independence mirrored the intellectual freedom that universities sought to foster. Just as the monks had once worked in isolation, so too did the scholars of the university, pursuing knowledge with a quiet determination. Cats, with their solitary nature, became symbols of this individual pursuit of intellectual enlightenment. But here's where things start to change again. By the time we reach the Renaissance and the early modern period, universities had become the dominant centers of learning, and libraries within these institutions became more structured and professional. The focus of these libraries shifted from the preservation of ancient manuscripts to the development of new ideas and knowledge. The role of cats began to fade as pest control methods became more efficient and as libraries began to modernize. The influence of cats in intellectual spaces, once so integral to the preservation of sacred texts, now became less prominent. The rise of printing presses and the mass production of books also played a significant role in this shift. As books became more widely available, the need for a cat to protect manuscripts diminished. That said, cats never truly disappeared from university spaces. In fact, many modern universities still keep cats around their libraries and other academic buildings. These cats, though no longer necessary for pest control in the traditional sense, have become beloved mascots, a link to the long history of cats in academic spaces. Some universities have even adopted official library cats, whose presence continues to bring an air of comfort and charm to the scholarly atmosphere. They are no longer the mysterious protectors of knowledge they once were, but they still embody the spirit of curiosity, independence and wisdom that has always been associated with intellectual pursuits.
Looking back on the rise of universities and the role that cats played in their development, it's clear that the presence of these animals was much more than just functional. While they helped to protect valuable manuscripts from pests, their symbolic role as guardians of knowledge, symbols of intellectual independence, and quiet companions to scholars cannot be overlooked. Whether in monasteries or universities, cats have been woven into the very fabric of intellectual and spiritual life for centuries, and though their role in libraries may have shifted over time, the bond between cats and knowledge remains a powerful one. As we move deeper into the evolution of libraries, we now focus on the universities, where cats maintained their place for a while longer, even as the practical role of the feline shifted. By the time universities fully took root in medieval Europe, they were places not just of education but of lively intellectual exchange. Scholars, students and professors were no longer just copying manuscripts or guarding sacred texts. They were engaging with new ideas, debating concepts and pioneering the future of knowledge. And in the midst of all this scholarly activity, the cats continued their quiet, ever-watchful role, serving not only as guardians of physical spaces, but also as silent witnesses to the growing world of intellectual pursuit. During the early years of the university system, the libraries were more modest compared to the grand institutions we think of today. These early university libraries were primarily focused on preserving theological texts, philosophy, and the classical works of ancient Greece and Rome. In many ways they functioned much like the monasteries before them, protecting knowledge against the ravages of time and neglect. This was still a world where written texts were rare and immensely valuable, and like in the monasteries, cats were integral in protecting these texts from pests. But there was an important shift happening during this time. The knowledge housed in these libraries wasn't just the theological knowledge of the past, it was becoming something more. Universities were beginning to cultivate new ideas, to challenge old ways of thinking, and to promote a sense of academic freedom. Cats, however, didn't need to adjust. Their role remained as constant and unassuming as ever. They were still there for the same reason they had been in monasteries: to protect the manuscripts, keep the library quiet, and provide companionship to the scholars who spent countless hours in these spaces. The intellectuals of the day may have been creating new knowledge, but the cats continued to work in the background, silently contributing to the preservation of the books and papers being created. In this way, cats became part of the intellectual ecosystem of the university, just as much a part of the academic environment as the professors and the students. Unlike their counterparts in monasteries, where the atmosphere was largely focused on religious contemplation, university libraries had a different energy. The classrooms were filled with students, the lecture halls buzzing with discussion and debate. In this environment, a cat's quiet, observant nature made it an ideal companion for a place that valued both silence and intellectual rigor. Cats seemed to embody the ideal balance of focus and curiosity, two qualities that university scholars prized. They moved through the libraries with ease, slipping between rows of books, silently watching as new knowledge was created. But let's not mistake the role of the cat in these spaces as just symbolic. As universities grew in size and complexity, so too did the challenges faced by their libraries. The demand for more books and texts increased, and with it came an influx of students and academics. With the rise of book printing, libraries began to amass far larger collections than ever before. This was a time of intense intellectual growth, and the presence of a cat in the library remained crucial. As more students came and more books were produced, the rats and mice found new ways to infiltrate the library's stacks. While the printing press had made knowledge more accessible, it also introduced a whole new set of challenges for the library's caretakers. The humble cat, however, was still there, quietly doing its job. Interestingly, the role of cats in university libraries during this period was more about sustaining the environment of intellectual pursuit rather than the purely functional act of pest control. Scholars may have relied on other methods of keeping rodents at bay, traps, poison, better building maintenance, but the cats still held a unique position in the library. They had become symbols of the university's intellectual life, roaming through the halls not only to keep the physical space safe, but also to help maintain the integrity and quietude of the space where the intellectual pursuits took place. In some ways, the cat came to represent the very spirit of the university itself, curious, independent, and fiercely protective of the valuable knowledge housed within its walls. But here's where things start to change. As the universities grew and became more sophisticated, the need for a cat's services began to diminish. The libraries, once quiet and humble places of solitary study, became bustling centers of research and collaboration. The rise of modern pest control methods, rat poison, traps, and more advanced hygiene techniques reduced the necessity for cats in the libraries. Additionally, the professionalization of university libraries meant that there were now staff dedicated to maintaining the space, ensuring that the books were properly protected from the elements and pests. As universities began to embrace more modern approaches to library management, the role of the cat began to fade. By the 18th and 19th centuries, as universities became more institutionalized and libraries more organized, the once ubiquitous presence of cats in academic spaces had become a rarity. Cats as protectors of the sacred texts were no longer necessary in the same way. The rise of public libraries, with their emphasis on accessibility and public use, further marginalized the role of the cat. Libraries were now about accessibility and sharing knowledge, not just preserving it in quiet, controlled spaces. The practical need for a cat in the library had largely disappeared, and the symbolic role it once held began to fade. Yet despite this decline, the legacy of the university cat hasn't disappeared entirely. In fact, many modern universities still keep cats in their libraries or academic buildings. These cats, now more as mascots or companions, are often beloved members of the university community. They no longer serve the same functional role they did in the medieval period, but their presence still evokes the same sense of mystery, independence, and intellectual curiosity that made them such an integral part of university libraries centuries ago. So while cats may have lost their practical role in libraries, their symbolic importance hasn't entirely faded. They're still tied to the very spirit of knowledge, independent, curious, and watchful. Just as they once guarded sacred texts, they now stand as silent sentinels to the ongoing pursuit of learning. And in a way, they remind us of the long history of intellectual curiosity and the quiet, steadfast guardianship that has always been necessary to preserve and protect knowledge. As we step into the world of the Renaissance and beyond, we can't overlook a fascinating twist in the story of library cats: their role as academic muses. While their primary job had been pest control, and their symbolic role as protectors of knowledge, there was another, more subtle function they served within intellectual spaces: their ability to inspire. Cats, with their quiet and mysterious nature, became something more than mere companions. They became symbols of the intellectual life, sparking reflection, creativity, and even philosophical musings. In medieval and Renaissance universities, the academic environment was buzzing with the exchange of ideas, and scholars were constantly seeking inspiration. Some of this inspiration came from books, from the great thinkers of the past, but a surprising amount came from the everyday objects and creatures around them, including the cats that roamed freely in the libraries and academic spaces. Cats, with their innate elegance, their serene yet curious nature, and their ability to observe the world without engaging directly in it, embodied the intellectual ideals that scholars of the time aspired to. Think about it: these cats were observant, independent, and not easily distracted. They weren't interested in the trivialities of human life. They moved with a quiet grace, observing everything but engaging only when necessary. This kind of silent, focused attention mirrored the kind of intellectual rigor that scholars sought in their work. The cats became in a way a living example of the scholarly pursuit of knowledge, patient, precise, and focused. In the midst of busy lecture halls, noisy discussions, and the chaos of student life, the calm demeanor of a library cat was a reminder of the value of quiet contemplation and observation. It's easy to imagine that in these quiet moments, scholars would have been inspired by the very presence of the cats. After all, they embodied the ideal intellectual virtues: independence, curiosity, and the ability to observe the world from a distance. They were in many ways the perfect academic muses. Whether it was the way a cat sat still for hours, watching the world with wide, intelligent eyes, or the way it moved silently through the library as if on a mission, the cat became a symbol of focused thought and intellectual integrity. In fact, it wasn't uncommon for scholars to use the presence of cats as a metaphor for the intellectual process. Cats, being creatures of grace and elegance, were often likened to the philosopher or scholar who carefully considers every aspect of a problem before making a decision. A cat's ability to observe its surroundings and act only when the time was right mirrored the careful thought that went into intellectual pursuits. The cat's attention to detail, its ability to notice the smallest movement or sound, was something scholars could admire and try to emulate in their own work. But it wasn't just in the realm of metaphors that cats made an impact. In some cases, cats became literal muses, inspiring scholars to write about them. Cats appeared in the writings of Renaissance thinkers, often serving as symbols of the intellectual virtues that were so highly regarded during that time. They were depicted in art, literature and poetry, always portrayed as mysterious, independent and wise. Cats were seen as symbols of the intellectual life, untamed, unfettered by conventional norms, and deeply attuned to the natural world. And let's not forget the occasional anecdote or story about a cat's antics. In the quiet, focused environment of the university library, the playful antics of a cat could offer a moment of levity. The scholars who often spent long hours hunched over their books, transcribing manuscripts or pondering deep philosophical questions, could find a brief distraction in the antics of a cat chasing a piece of string or pouncing on a shadow. These small moments of amusement, provided by the cats, were a welcome break in the otherwise serious and intense academic atmosphere. And it's no stretch to say that these moments of joy, however brief, contributed to the overall creative and intellectual energy of the university. Historians often argue whether the scholarly inspiration provided by cats was purely symbolic, or if their presence in the intellectual spaces was as significant as we might imagine. Some might say that the idea of a cat as an academic muse is simply a romanticized version of history, a way to turn these animals into something greater than they were. However, given the respect that was shown to animals in medieval and Renaissance times, it's likely that the cat's role in inspiring intellectual thought was real. Whether through their quiet contemplative presence or through their actual contributions to the library's functioning, cats had a subtle yet undeniable influence on the intellectual life of their time. The connection between cats and intellectualism is not just confined to the medieval or Renaissance periods. Today, cats still evoke the same sense of mystery and curiosity in scholars, writers, and creatives. In modern times, it's not uncommon for people to keep cats in their offices or writing spaces, finding inspiration in the way these animals approach the world. It's as if the cat, through its graceful presence and independent nature, offers a quiet reminder of the importance of solitude, focus, and careful observation, key components of the creative and intellectual processes. In this way, the legacy of the medieval library cat as an academic muse continues to resonate in the modern world. Whether in ancient libraries, Renaissance universities, or modern offices and creative spaces, cats remain symbols of the intellectual virtues that are still valued today. They represent the balance between independence and curiosity, the pursuit of knowledge, and the quiet contemplation that leads to creativity and insight. In the world of academia, cats continue to inspire, not just by their presence but by the ideas and emotions they evoke. As we move further into the history of cats in libraries, it's time to focus on some of the more notable famous cats that have left their paw prints in literary and academic history. Cats weren't just present in libraries, they became beloved figures in some of the most famous intellectual spaces of their time. Their presence in these famous libraries not only contributed to the charm and mystery of these spaces, but also helped shape the cultural narrative around the role of animals in scholarly life. Let's take a look at some of the most famous library cats and the stories that have made them legends. First, we have the legendary cat of the Trinity College Library in Dublin, Ireland, a place known for its rich history and vast collection of ancient texts. The library is home to the Book of Kells, one of the most famous and beautifully illuminated manuscripts in the world. But more than just a place of incredible historical importance, Trinity College has also been home to a famous library cat named Hodge. Hodge, a beloved tabby, lived in the library during the 18th century and became a local icon. According to historical accounts, Hodge was especially fond of the library's staff and the books themselves. He would often be found lounging among the texts or napping on the steps of the library's grand staircase.
Hodge became such an integral part of the Trinity College experience that Samuel Johnson, the famous English writer and lexicographer, once remarked that Hodge is the finest cat that ever lived. Johnson had a deep affection for Hodge and would frequently feed him oysters, which the cat loved. Today, Hodge's legacy lives on in the library's lore, and there are even commemorative plaques in his honor. The presence of this famous cat in such a storied academic space shows just how entwined the lives of cats and scholars were in the past. Hodge was more than just a pet, he was a symbol of the spirit of the library itself, calm, focused, and always watching over the knowledge stored within its walls. Next, let's travel to the United States and visit the Library of Congress, one of the largest and most prestigious libraries in the world. While there's no famous cat like Hodge residing here, the library does have a long-standing tradition of welcoming cats to its premises. In fact, during the 19th and early 20th centuries, cats were often seen wandering the stacks, particularly in the library's rare book collection areas. These cats were likely not as famous as Hodge, but were nonetheless integral to the day-to-day workings of the library. They helped manage the rodent population that might have threatened the valuable books and manuscripts in the library's care. Even though these cats did not have the same level of recognition, their presence in such an iconic institution further solidified the role of cats in libraries as protectors and companions. One particularly famous example of a library cat that became a symbol of intellectual curiosity comes from the Cat Library in Japan. This unique library, dedicated to all things feline, is home to a collection of thousands of cat-related books, art and artifacts. The library, located in the city of Yokohama, features a resident cat named Maru, who has become a symbol of both the library and the love people have for cats. Maru, a Scottish fold cat, is known for his playful nature and has captured the hearts of visitors around the world. His antics, his love for climbing into small boxes, and his laid-back attitude have made him the face of the library. In fact, Maru's popularity extends far beyond the library walls. His YouTube videos, which document his daily adventures, have garnered millions of views. The Cat Library, with Maru at its helm, exemplifies how libraries continue to embrace cats as symbols of knowledge, curiosity, and comfort. Of course, not all library cats are as famous as Hodge or Maru, but their presence is no less significant. In fact, many small libraries and academic spaces across the world have their own resident cats quietly keeping watch over the books, offering companionship to staff, and becoming beloved members of the library community. These cats are often unofficial mascots, embodying the intellectual curiosity and peace that libraries strive to provide. Whether they have names, titles, or simply exist as anonymous guardians of the library's precious knowledge, these cats play a vital role in maintaining the atmosphere of scholarship and learning. What's fascinating is that, despite the changing nature of libraries over the centuries, moving from private monasteries to public universities, from the handwritten scroll to the printed book, cats have remained a steady presence. They may not have the same practical function they once did, but they continue to serve as a symbol of the mystery and magic that books hold. Cats still embody the spirit of the intellectual pursuit, curious, independent, watchful, and ever present in the background, silently observing the flow of knowledge. These famous library cats, whether beloved pets or mysterious guardians, help us understand just how deeply entwined cats and libraries have become. They are not merely functional workers, they are symbols of the intellectual and spiritual endeavors that libraries represent. The legacy of the library cat continues to this day, in both practical and symbolic ways. From Hodge the cat to Maru the Scottish fold, these felines remind us of the long history of cats in academic spaces, their quiet influence on the preservation of knowledge, and their ongoing role as companions and muses to those who seek wisdom. As we turn the page into modern times, the role of cats in libraries has taken on a more complex and perhaps nostalgic character. Their presence is no longer driven by practical necessity. The threat of rats and mice in today's libraries is no longer a pressing issue with the advent of modern pest control methods. Yet, cats continue to play a fascinating role in libraries around the world. Whether as mascots, companions, or symbols of mystery, their influence endures. But this raises an interesting question. Do cats still have a meaningful place in modern libraries, or is their presence more about nostalgia and sentimentality than anything else? In the modern world, the most practical aspects of the medieval library cat, pest control and protection, have been replaced by technology. With automated climate controls, pest management systems, and even specialized archival materials, libraries today are far better equipped to protect their collections than their medieval counterparts. Yet, despite these advances, the image of the library cat persists in the collective cultural imagination. Cats, with their serene, silent presence, have become intertwined with the idea of knowledge itself. They represent the quiet, solitary nature of study, and their graceful movements embody the intellectual pursuit. But is this perception of the cat as a guardian of knowledge purely symbolic? Historians and modern librarians continue to debate the role of cats in contemporary libraries. Some argue that their presence is purely ceremonial, that cats no longer serve any practical purpose beyond being cute, comforting, and a bit quirky. After all, with the growing trend of library cats being adopted primarily as mascots, one could argue that their role has shifted dramatically from being workers to being purely decorative. These cats, often adopted by libraries to improve the atmosphere, help create a sense of warmth and personality in an otherwise sterile space. In an era where libraries are often seen as places of community and learning, cats offer a humanizing presence, providing something soft and approachable in an otherwise academic, sometimes intimidating environment. On the other hand, some argue that cats still serve a deeper, more intangible function. Even though modern libraries are no longer at risk from pests, cats continue to contribute to the intellectual ambiance of the space. Their quiet, contemplative nature fits well within the framework of a place designed for focused study and reflection. There is something inherently calming about a cat's presence, a quiet reminder to slow down, observe and reflect, traits that are still deeply valued in academic and intellectual pursuits today. Whether curled up in a sunbeam or prowling between rows of books, the cat remains a silent partner in the pursuit of knowledge, offering a moment of serenity amidst the hustle and bustle of modern life. Moreover, cats have become symbols of curiosity and independence, qualities that are central to the academic world. In a way, the modern library cat acts as a reminder of the intellectual freedom that libraries offer. Just as medieval scholars sought knowledge in a solitary, focused manner, modern students and scholars are encouraged to embrace curiosity and independent thinking. Cats, with their independent nature and quiet curiosity, mirror these qualities perfectly. So while they may no longer serve as guardians of manuscripts, their symbolic importance in libraries is as potent as ever. But perhaps the most interesting debate surrounding the modern library cat is the growing trend of cats as library workers. While their duties have evolved, cats still perform vital functions in some libraries. Some libraries, especially in rural areas or in institutions with a long history, continue to keep cats not just as pets but as part of the working staff. For example, the Schenectady County Public Library in New York is famous for its resident cat, Buddy. Buddy serves more than just an aesthetic purpose. He's an integral part of the library's community. His gentle presence and charm have made him a beloved figure among library patrons, and his role in greeting visitors and providing comfort has made him a key part of the library experience. Similarly, in the University of Alberta in Canada, a cat named Clara was part of the library staff for years. Clara's primary job was to provide comfort and companionship to the students and faculty who used the library. While Clara didn't have to hunt rats or protect manuscripts, she provided something perhaps even more important: emotional support. She was there when students needed a break, when they were stressed from exams or buried in research. The simple act of petting a cat has been shown to reduce stress and increase feelings of well-being, and Clara was there to provide that relief to weary scholars. Though her official duties were not as clearly defined as those of the medieval library cats, Clara's presence was no less important. This modern shift in the role of cats in libraries highlights the evolving relationship between humans and animals in academic spaces. Cats, in the contemporary library, are not just guardians of knowledge, they are companions, comforters, and even mascots. They provide a sense of warmth and tranquility that modern libraries, often sprawling and technology-heavy, sometimes lack. In a world that's increasingly digital, the physical presence of a cat, a soft living creature, reminds us of the value of slowing down, taking a moment to breathe, and reflecting on the knowledge we're surrounded by. While the practical necessity of cats in libraries has faded, their symbolic importance remains undeniable. They embody the quiet pursuit of knowledge, the patience required to study and reflect, and the intellectual curiosity that lies at the heart of academia. And as we move further into the 21st century, cats may continue to serve as silent muses, companions and symbols in libraries, their presence as relevant to the pursuit of knowledge as it ever was. The modern library cat, it seems, is more than just a pet. It's a quiet reminder of the importance of curiosity, independence, and the preservation of knowledge, even in a world dominated by technology and instant access to information. Historians still debate whether the role of cats in libraries is as meaningful today as it was in the past. But one thing is clear, the enduring image of the library cat as a protector of knowledge, a companion in study, and a symbol of intellectual independence continues to captivate the imagination of those who enter libraries across the world. Whether they are quietly napping on a windowsill or playing with a piece of string, library cats are here to stay, forever intertwined with the tradition of learning. As we explore the modern relevance of library cats, one aspect that continues to intrigue scholars and psychologists is the psychological comfort that these feline companions provide to library users. Though cats no longer serve the same practical purpose they did in medieval times, their presence in libraries still holds significant emotional and psychological benefits for students, scholars and visitors. In fact, the calming effect of cats in these spaces may be one of the reasons why they continue to be welcomed in libraries around the world. Studies have shown that the presence of animals, particularly cats and dogs, can have a profound impact on human well-being. The simple act of petting a cat has been scientifically proven to reduce stress, lower blood pressure, and even improve mood. In a place like the library, where people often experience stress and anxiety, particularly around exams, research deadlines, or the pressure to perform academically, the soothing presence of a cat can offer a much-needed respite. Whether curled up in a corner or playfully moving through the aisles, a library cat provides a comforting, non-judgmental presence that offers emotional support without asking for anything in return. But the psychological benefits go beyond just reducing stress. Cats also offer a sense of companionship. For many students or scholars who spend long hours working in solitude, the presence of a cat can provide a sense of connection and comfort. The quiet companionship of a cat, who sits with you as you work or listens as you talk, can alleviate feelings of loneliness and isolation that can sometimes accompany the intense focus required for academic work. In fact, research has shown that the presence of animals can reduce feelings of loneliness and increase a person's sense of social connection, even if the animal isn't interacting with them directly. The calming influence of a library cat can also enhance focus and concentration. Cats are naturally curious and observant creatures, and their quiet, subtle movements can serve as a calming background to the intense mental work happening in a library. Students who are studying or conducting research often report feeling more relaxed and able to concentrate when a cat is nearby. The presence of the cat can act as a grounding force, offering a peaceful counterpoint to the intellectual intensity of academic work. Just as cats embody the pursuit of knowledge with their quiet grace, they also help reinforce the ideal of focus, patience and contemplation that is central to the scholarly life. One of the most fascinating aspects of this phenomenon is how the presence of cats can alter the atmosphere of the library itself. In spaces that can feel cold or sterile, particularly in larger, more modern libraries, the cat adds a layer of warmth and personality. Cats help humanize the space, making it feel more inviting and less intimidating. In many ways, a library cat can transform a place of quiet study into a more approachable and comfortable environment, allowing visitors to relax and feel at ease while they engage in their intellectual pursuits.
But there's also a psychological depth to the symbolism of the cat in a library. Cats have long been associated with independence and curiosity, two qualities that are highly valued in the academic world. They represent the ability to learn, explore, and think critically without being bound by conventional rules. A cat's independent nature reminds us of the importance of intellectual freedom, the freedom to explore new ideas, challenge existing beliefs, and pursue knowledge for its own sake. In this sense, the presence of a cat in the library isn't just about comfort, it's a reflection of the intellectual and philosophical values that libraries strive to uphold. The calming influence of cats is not only beneficial to the students and scholars working in the library, but also to the library staff, librarians and support staff, who often spend long hours working in the library as well, benefit from the presence of a cat. For staff members who are responsible for ensuring the smooth operation of the library, having a cat around can provide moments of relaxation and relief from the sometimes stressful nature of their job. The presence of the cat can serve as a reminder to slow down, breathe and refocus. It's no surprise that many library staff members find comfort in their feline companions, and some even develop deep emotional connections with the animals they care for. And let's not forget about the potential therapeutic benefits of library cats for visitors with mental health challenges. Libraries are increasingly becoming spaces where people not only engage with information but also seek refuge from the stresses of daily life. People who experience anxiety, depression, or other mental health struggles can benefit from the presence of a calm and soothing animal. The presence of a library cat can provide a safe, non-threatening space where people can unwind and engage with their environment in a way that feels comforting and supportive. In some ways, the library cat acts as a kind of emotional anchor for the intellectual space. As patrons move through the library, whether they're researching, studying, or simply browsing, the cat provides a sense of continuity and connection. It's as if the cat, despite its quiet nature, becomes a constant companion in the process of learning. It's there, watching over the space, creating a sense of stability in the midst of a world that is constantly changing. The emotional and psychological comfort that cats provide is as important as the practical work they once performed, and this is why cats continue to be beloved figures in libraries today. Though modern libraries may no longer rely on cats for pest control, their presence in these spaces remains deeply symbolic. Cats represent the intellectual curiosity and independence that libraries stand for, and their calming influence offers much-needed emotional support to those who seek knowledge within their walls. Whether curled up by the windowsill, quietly prowling the aisles, or lazily chasing a stray sunbeam, library cats continue to serve as comforting, inspiring companions, reminding us all of the quiet pursuit of knowledge and the importance of mental well-being in the academic process. As we look into the modern age, we see that the legacy of the library cat, though evolved, is far from gone. Despite the technological advancements in libraries, from digital catalogues to e-books, cats continue to be cherished members of many academic and public libraries around the world. Their presence in these spaces today has become more about culture, comfort, and continuity than about guarding manuscripts from rodents. However, their symbolic importance remains just as significant as it was in the medieval period. In many ways, library cats have transcended their historical roles as mere protectors of books, becoming beloved figures that embody the enduring connection between knowledge, tranquility, and the human spirit. In recent years, the presence of cats in libraries has become somewhat of a cultural phenomenon. With the rise of social media, many library cats have become stars in their own right, drawing attention from visitors and cat lovers around the globe. One of the most famous modern-day library cats is Dewey Read More Books, the beloved cat of the Spencer Public Library in Iowa. Dewey's story is one of serendipity and charm. He was found as a kitten, abandoned in the book return box one cold winter night. The library staff adopted him, and he quickly became a local celebrity. Dewey lived in the library for over 19 years, providing comfort to library patrons and staff alike. His legacy endures through the book he inspired, Dewey the Small-Town Library Cat Who Touched the World. Dewey's story is just one example of how library cats, even in the 21st century, continue to be living symbols of warmth, comfort, and connection. In addition to their increasing fame on social media, cats in libraries have come to represent a kind of timelessness. In a world where technology is constantly changing, the presence of a cat in the library offers a gentle reminder of the more traditional, quiet pleasures of reading and reflection. Cats move through the space like living monuments to a slower, more introspective time. They embody the very essence of what many people still cherish about libraries: the calm atmosphere, the sense of peace that permeates the shelves, and the opportunity to lose oneself in a book. Beyond their role as cultural icons, library cats also serve practical purposes in today's libraries, albeit in more symbolic and subtle ways. They continue to bring a sense of calm and serenity to spaces that are often busy and filled with distractions. In many ways, the library cat is a living, breathing embodiment of the library's mission to provide a place for learning, self-reflection, and intellectual engagement. Their quiet presence in the library fosters a sense of comfort, creating an environment where visitors can focus and immerse themselves in their studies or leisure reading. In some instances, library cats are even part of library programs. Some libraries have instituted Adopt a Cat or Meet the Cat events, where visitors can come to spend time with the library cats, reducing stress and building community. These programs not only bring comfort to individuals, but also foster connections among library patrons. Cats, as always, remain steadfast companions, comforting those who spend time in the libraries and bridging the gap between the intellectual space and the emotional needs of its visitors. What is perhaps most beautiful about the continued presence of cats in libraries is how they symbolize the intersection of past and present. In a world of digitized texts, ebooks, and online databases, the library cat stands as a living connection to the traditions of old. Cats, like the libraries they reside in, have adapted and evolved over time. They've gone from being guardians of ancient scrolls and manuscripts to being gentle reminders of the intellectual legacy that libraries strive to preserve. Their role in libraries today may not be as vital as it once was, but they continue to carry with them the symbolic weight of intellectual pursuit, independence, and the preservation of knowledge. The role of cats in libraries may have changed, but they are still very much part of the larger conversation about the importance of libraries in our lives. They remind us that libraries are more than just places to borrow books, they are sanctuaries for the mind and spirit, where knowledge is cherished and preserved. In many ways, the library cat has come to represent the enduring significance of these spaces, places where learning, curiosity, and quiet reflection can thrive. Today, library cats continue to play a central role in shaping the atmosphere of their libraries, offering solace to students cramming for exams, providing companionship to solitary researchers, and creating a sense of warmth for anyone who enters. Their presence, whether it's a lazy nap by the windowsill or a gentle nudge as a visitor browses the shelves, serves as a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge doesn't have to be a solitary, isolated endeavor. In fact, it's often better when shared, even with a cat. The library cat's enduring legacy speaks volumes about the importance of maintaining a sense of tradition in the ever-evolving world of libraries. Just as cats have evolved from their ancient mystical roles as guardians of sacred texts to their modern-day status as comforters and cultural icons, libraries themselves continue to evolve while retaining the timeless values that make them special. The library cat, in all its quiet, mysterious glory, will always have a place in this world of knowledge, continuing to serve as a reminder that no matter how much things change, some things, like the love of reading, curiosity, and comfort, remain the same. At this point in our journey, we've looked at the practical, symbolic, and even psychological roles that cats have played in libraries throughout history. However, there's one more aspect of the library cat's legacy that is worth exploring: the spiritual connection. Throughout the centuries, cats have been viewed not only as protectors of knowledge or comforting companions, but also as animals with deep spiritual significance. Their mystical presence, coupled with their association with knowledge, positions them as powerful symbols in the libraries of old and even now in the modern libraries that welcome them. In the medieval era, where superstition and religious belief often shaped every aspect of life, cats held a unique place. They were often linked with the divine, sometimes viewed as sacred creatures with an almost supernatural ability to guard and protect. In this spiritual context, the library itself, as a space dedicated to the preservation of knowledge, became intertwined with the idea of the divine. The role of cats in these libraries was seen not just as practical but spiritual. Just as the monks labored to preserve sacred texts, the cat was a symbol of divine protection, watching over the manuscripts and keeping them safe from the ravages of time, pests, and destruction. Many medieval monks believed that libraries were sacred spaces, akin to places of worship. To these monks, the act of transcribing texts was as holy as prayer, an act of devotion that could protect and preserve sacred knowledge for future generations. In this spiritual atmosphere, the presence of the cat was more than just practical, it was symbolic of divine protection. The cat's quiet vigilance, its mystical aura, and its ability to observe without being seen all aligned with the idea of spiritual guardianship. The presence of a cat in these sacred spaces became synonymous with the idea that knowledge, much like the divine, required protection from unseen forces. Historically, cats were also associated with gods and goddesses. In ancient Egypt, the cat was revered as a symbol of fertility, protection, and motherhood, often linked to the goddess Bastet, the goddess of home, fertility, and protector of women and children. Bastet was depicted with the head of a lioness, or a domestic cat, embodying the grace, mystery, and strength that we associate with these animals. The Egyptians saw cats as sacred animals with a divine presence, believed to bring protection and good fortune. Given this deep spiritual connection, it's easy to see how over time, cats became symbols of the divine in many other cultures. In the Christian tradition, the association between cats and the divine took on a more symbolic nature, aligning with the concepts of guardianship and purity. As Christianity began to dominate Europe, cats were often associated with the spiritual realm. Their role as protectors of knowledge could be interpreted as guardians of the divine wisdom contained within manuscripts and sacred texts. Whether consciously or unconsciously, the monks likely saw the presence of the cat in the library as an embodiment of God's protection over the knowledge they were transcribing and preserving. The quiet nature of the cat, always watchful and vigilant, mirrored the monk's own quest for spiritual enlightenment, silent, careful, and ever devoted. In modern times, this spiritual connection continues to resonate, albeit in a more abstract sense. The symbolism of cats as guardians of knowledge has evolved, but their spiritual aura remains. Libraries, still viewed by many as sacred places, continue to welcome cats not just as companions, but as symbols of the peace and tranquility that these spaces provide. Whether it's a cat curling up beside a scholar, or gently walking between the stacks, there's a sense of calm and serenity that follows them. The act of reading or studying in the presence of a cat can feel almost meditative, as if the presence of the animal creates a connection between the intellectual pursuit and something more profound, something spiritual. In some libraries, particularly those with a long history and deep cultural significance, the presence of cats is seen as a continuation of this ancient spiritual tradition. In these spaces, cats serve as silent protectors, not only of the physical books and manuscripts, but also of the intellectual and spiritual energy that fills the library. This continued spiritual significance gives the library cat a kind of timeless importance, linking it to a centuries-old tradition of reverence for knowledge and learning. The cat in its quiet stillness reflects the sacred nature of the library itself, reminding us that knowledge is something to be respected, preserved and protected. And perhaps this is the most enduring role of the library cat. While the practical necessity of pest control may have faded, and the symbolic associations with the divine may be less prevalent today, the spiritual significance of the cat remains. In its quiet, watchful presence, the library cat is a reminder of the sanctity of knowledge. It embodies the intellectual and spiritual pursuit that libraries have always represented, a pursuit that transcends time and connects the past, present and future. For those who walk into libraries today, whether they are students, scholars or casual visitors, the presence of a cat provides a quiet, calming influence. It is as if the cat, through its calm energy and spiritual symbolism, invites us to pause, reflect and appreciate the knowledge around us. Cats are creatures of mystery, and they hold a special place in our hearts because they remind us that the pursuit of knowledge is not just an intellectual task, it's a sacred journey. Their presence in libraries is a reminder of the profound connection between humans and the written word, a connection that has existed for centuries and will continue to endure, with the humble cat watching over it all. As the centuries have passed, the symbolic role of cats in libraries has continued to evolve, and their place in modern culture has taken on a new, often whimsical character. Today, cats are more than just quiet guardians of books. They have become cultural icons, symbols of comfort, curiosity, and creativity. While libraries no longer rely on cats for pest control or the protection of sacred knowledge, the enduring image of the library cat has become deeply ingrained in cultural representations of intellectual spaces. From literature to art, and even social media, cats continue to be the faces of libraries, reminding us of the intimate emotional relationship between humans and knowledge. In modern libraries, cats have taken on a role that mixes tradition with contemporary charm. Rather than just serving as silent protectors, many libraries now house cats that are actively integrated into library life. In some cases, these cats are adopted by libraries as part of a broader effort to make the space more welcoming and human-centered. Cats are often seen curling up in the reading corners, prowling among the shelves, or lounging by windows. Their presence fosters a sense of comfort and relaxation for visitors, particularly in libraries that can sometimes feel sterile or overwhelming. The cat brings a human touch to the library space, making it feel more like a home than an institution. The cultural impact of library cats has been amplified by the advent of social media. Cats like Maru from Japan's Cat Library, Dewey read more books from Spencer Public Library, and Franklin from the New York Public Library have become internet celebrities. These cats, with their unique personalities and quirks, have built massive followings online, and in doing so, have turned the library cat into a cultural icon.
On platforms like Instagram and YouTube, library cats are now able to connect with people from all over the world, reinforcing the connection between the library and the emotional well-being of its patrons. They've also become symbols of comfort and joy, providing a reprieve for those who turn to libraries for quiet moments of reflection or study. The library cat, once a humble protector of knowledge, has now become a star in its own right. But the library cat's influence doesn't stop with social media. In literature too, cats continue to be celebrated as symbols of wisdom and mystery. One of the most iconic fictional library cats is Puss in Boots, a character made famous by Charles Perrault's fairy tale, and later popularized by various adaptations, including the Shrek film series. While Puss in Boots is a more fantastical character, his connection to the world of books and storytelling is evident. The image of the clever, resourceful cat has been a mainstay in stories, making its way into countless works of literature. Similarly, other fictional cats such as the Cat in the Hat have become key cultural figures who represent a playful and sometimes rebellious spirit that contrasts with the solemnity of traditional library spaces. In the world of art, cats have often been depicted in library settings, further reinforcing their symbolic importance. The serene, almost ethereal presence of cats in artistic depictions of libraries reminds us that knowledge is not always an arduous or serious pursuit. It can also be a leisurely and reflective experience. Artists often depict cats lounging on bookshelves, representing the calm that knowledge can bring, or the sense of quietude that one feels in a library. These artistic renderings serve to highlight the contrast between the intellectual labor of the human mind and the ease and serenity of the feline creature. In fact, in many ways the library cat has become a symbol of the quiet, reflective nature of study itself. In an age where information is increasingly consumed through digital screens, and libraries are transitioning to more tech-focused spaces, the image of the library cat offers a sense of nostalgia and tradition. The cat represents the timeless pursuit of knowledge, something that cannot be rushed, something that requires contemplation, patience, and a certain level of stillness. As libraries continue to evolve, the image of the cat reminds us of the enduring importance of taking time to absorb information slowly, thoughtfully, and with care. The symbolism of cats in libraries also speaks to broader societal shifts, especially in regard to how we perceive intellectual spaces. Libraries today, more than ever, are places where people can come to find peace amidst the chaos of modern life. With the rapid pace of technological change and the overwhelming amount of information available online, many people turn to libraries as sanctuaries of calm and focus. Cats, with their independent and contemplative nature, represent the kind of quiet reflection that libraries offer. They are symbols of the need for solitude and introspection in an age of constant distraction. In some ways, the library cat has transcended its status as a mere mascot. It's become a cultural touchstone for intellectual engagement, a figure that resonates deeply with anyone who has spent time in a library. Whether it's the scholarly cat that prowls through the shelves, or the playful kitten who provides an unexpected moment of joy, library cats have become emblematic of the values libraries represent: curiosity, creativity, and the quiet, patient pursuit of knowledge. This is why libraries continue to feature cats as part of their culture, despite the fact that their role in pest control is no longer necessary. Cats continue to serve as guardians of the library's spirit, representing the quiet guardianship of knowledge and the importance of creating spaces where intellectual pursuits can thrive. Whether they're providing comfort, acting as living symbols of the scholarly life, or becoming viral sensations online, library cats are a testament to the enduring power of books, quietude, and the love of knowledge. As libraries continue to evolve in the digital age, the cultural significance of the library cat remains just as strong as ever. They remind us that while technology may change how we access information, the underlying values of learning, reflection, and curiosity remain constant. Cats, in their mysterious, independent way, will always have a place in our libraries, quietly guarding the wisdom of the past and offering comfort to those who seek knowledge. As we continue our exploration of library cats, it becomes clear that they are much more than just charming companions or symbols of intellectual curiosity. Cats have also come to represent resilience, a quality that is vital both to the survival of libraries and to the preservation of knowledge itself. In a world that constantly evolves, libraries like cats must adapt to change while holding on to the timeless values they represent. In this section we explore the ways in which library cats embody the resilience of the libraries they inhabit, offering a symbol of strength and continuity in an ever-changing world. The resilience of cats is undeniable. Cats have long been admired for their ability to survive and thrive in a variety of environments. They are survivors, capable of adapting to changing circumstances with a quiet, unassuming grace. This adaptability is one of the reasons why cats have remained such enduring figures in libraries. Just as cats have thrived in the most challenging of environments, libraries have had to adapt to societal and technological shifts over the centuries. From the rise of the printing press to the digitization of books and the internet's vast expanse of information, libraries have weathered significant changes. The library cat in many ways mirrors this resilience, symbolizing the ability to endure and adapt in the face of uncertainty. Libraries today face challenges that would have been unthinkable to their medieval predecessors. The digital age has transformed how information is stored, shared and accessed. Many people no longer go to physical libraries to do research or read books. They access information online from the comfort of their homes. The role of the library has shifted as well. Libraries are no longer just spaces for storing books. They have become community centers, learning hubs and spaces for public engagement. The challenge for libraries today is to remain relevant in this rapidly changing landscape while still preserving the traditions and values that have made them cornerstones of knowledge and education for centuries. It is here that the symbolic role of the library cat becomes especially powerful. Cats, in their quiet and unassuming way, are reminders of the importance of endurance and continuity. Just as libraries have had to adapt to new technologies, the library cat represents the enduring qualities of the library itself, its commitment to preserving knowledge, fostering intellectual growth, and providing a safe, welcoming space for people to explore and learn. Despite the rapid pace of change, the presence of a library cat signals that, like the cat, libraries are resilient and capable of evolving while maintaining their core mission. In times of crisis, whether it be a global pandemic or the threat of library closures due to funding cuts, the resilience of libraries, much like the resilience of cats, becomes all the more important. When the world around us feels uncertain and unstable, libraries have remained places of stability and refuge. Library cats, quietly curled up in the corners of reading rooms or patrolling the aisles, serve as symbols of this steady, unyielding resilience. They are not just passive observers of the world, they are active participants in maintaining the integrity of the space, ensuring that it remains a sanctuary for learning, creativity, and community, regardless of external pressures. The resilience of cats can also be seen in the way they are cherished and cared for in libraries. In some libraries, the cats are not just adopted as mascots but as integral members of the library too. They offer comfort to staff, visitors and patrons alike, providing a sense of warmth and reassurance. This care, this dedication to the well-being of the cats, reflects the broader mission of libraries, to care for and protect the knowledge and the community they serve. Just as the cats in medieval libraries were valued for their role in preserving manuscripts, modern library cats are valued for the ways in which they preserve the library's spirit. They provide emotional support, create a welcoming atmosphere, and remind us that, like libraries, we can endure and adapt in times of hardship. Furthermore, the presence of cats in libraries also reflects the resilience of the written word itself. While the forms in which we access information have changed dramatically, shifting from scrolls to codices, from printed books to e-books, the fundamental importance of knowledge has remained constant. The act of preserving and sharing knowledge has been an ongoing endeavor, and libraries have been the heart of this effort. Cats, in their quiet, ever-watchful presence, are a symbol of this unwavering dedication to knowledge. Whether guarding manuscripts in medieval libraries or offering comfort in modern spaces, library cats remind us that knowledge, like the cat, is resilient. It can endure, adapt and continue to thrive, no matter the challenges it faces. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of the library cat's role as a symbol of resilience is the way it embodies the spirit of quiet persistence. Libraries are spaces that, by their very nature, encourage the slow, steady process of learning and discovery. A cat, with its patient, independent nature, mirrors this process. It is not about immediate results or flashy achievements. It's about steady, deliberate progress. The cat's quiet watchfulness serves as a metaphor for the way knowledge is built over time, piece by piece, word by word, page by page. In an era where information is often overwhelming and fleeting, the presence of a library cat serves as a reminder that true knowledge requires time, patience, and resilience. Cats teach us that it's okay to move slowly, to observe, to think deeply, and to appreciate the small moments of connection and understanding that come with sustained effort. Just as the cat moves through the library with quiet purpose, so too must we approach our own intellectual journeys with focus, resilience, and a steady belief in the power of knowledge. In the face of the rapid technological changes and evolving societal needs, the library cat stands as a timeless symbol of the enduring importance of libraries. They remind us that while the world changes, the core values of libraries, knowledge, learning and intellectual freedom remain resilient. The cats may not be necessary for pest control anymore, but their quiet, steadfast presence continues to inspire and comfort. They embody the spirit of the library, which like them, will always adapt, endure and thrive. As we reach the modern era, the legacy of the library cat has transcended the walls of academic institutions and library stacks. Library cats have become ingrained in popular culture, often representing more than just their historical function. These cats have evolved from guardians of manuscripts and mascots for scholarly spaces into beloved figures that embody the essence of knowledge, tranquility, and curiosity. Their presence in popular media, literature, and art reflects the continued cultural importance of these quiet creatures and reinforces their role as symbols of wisdom, intellectual pursuit, and resilience. One of the most prominent examples of the library cat's continued relevance in popular culture can be seen. Cats have been characters in stories and novels for centuries, but their association with libraries and academia has produced some truly iconic portrayals. In books such as The Cat Who series by Lillian Jackson Braun, cats are more than just pets. They're central characters who help solve mysteries, offering their intuitive and silent intelligence. These fictional cats, much like the real library cats, are emblematic of the deep connection between cats and the world of knowledge. They are portrayed as clever, observant, and often better at solving problems than the humans around them, perfect representations of the mysterious aura that cats bring to intellectual spaces.
In more recent times, the library cat trope has appeared in novels and children's books, where they are often depicted as symbols of both comfort and wisdom. For example, in The Library Cat by Mary Chalmers, the story follows a cat who brings comfort to the library's patrons with his calm presence and gentle personality. This children's book showcases the warmth and emotional support that cats provide in libraries, while also highlighting their ability to bring people together in the shared space of learning. Moving beyond literature, the image of the library cat has also found its place in the world of cinema and television. Films like The Aristocats, while not strictly about libraries, capture the essence of the curious and independent nature of cats, which parallels the intellectual freedom found in a library setting. Moreover, many films and TV shows featuring libraries or scholarly environments often include a cat, reinforcing the idea that libraries are sanctuaries for both knowledge and quiet contemplation. The presence of a cat in such scenes isn't just a casual choice, it's a deliberate symbol of peace, intelligence, and the timeless nature of libraries themselves. In art, the library cat also holds a significant place. Artists often depict libraries as tranquil, solemn places where the pursuit of knowledge takes center stage. Cats, as part of these artistic depictions, provide a serene, almost spiritual presence, embodying the quiet focus that is necessary for scholarly work. They are often painted or drawn lounging in corners of library rooms or perched on windowsills, observing the world with calm attentiveness. These portrayals underscore the symbolic role of the cat as an observer, silent, patient, and always in tune with the environment. Just as cats have always been seen as protectors of knowledge, their artistic representation in libraries further cements their place as symbols of the intellectual and spiritual atmosphere found within these sacred spaces. As we look at the role of library cats in popular culture, it's also important to note their influence in modern-day social media. Today, library cats have become internet sensations, attracting attention from people all over the world. Libraries like the New York Public Library, Seattle's Central Library, and the Toronto Public Library have all introduced cats into their spaces, many of whom have gone on to gain significant followings on platforms like Instagram and Twitter. These cats, such as Bob the Cat at the Temple Bar Books in Dublin or Mr. Purrington at the New York Public Library, have become cultural icons, their photos and videos shared by millions of followers who adore their antics and appreciate the calm, peaceful atmosphere they bring to the library. The increasing popularity of library cats on social media highlights the evolving relationship between the digital world and traditional spaces of learning. While the digital age has transformed how we access information, it has also revived an appreciation for the physical spaces in which knowledge is stored. The library cat, as a fixture in these spaces, has become a beloved reminder of the timeless nature of libraries. These cats act as ambassadors for their libraries, attracting visitors who are eager to see the famous feline and connect with the intellectual traditions that these libraries represent. Library cats also continue to inspire grassroots efforts to preserve the legacy of libraries in the digital age. Their cultural relevance has led to campaigns to keep libraries open, to ensure they continue to be accessible spaces for learning, and to emphasize their importance in fostering community and creativity. Cats, as symbols of resilience and continuity, provide a rallying point for those who advocate for the preservation of libraries in an increasingly digitized world. The presence of a library cat reminds us that libraries are not just places of information, they are sanctuaries of community, creativity, and intellectual discovery. Perhaps one of the most important aspects of the library cat's place in popular culture is the way they embody the intersection of tradition and modernity. In an era where libraries are evolving rapidly, adapting to new technologies, new modes of information access, and changing societal needs, the library cat stands as a symbol of the enduring qualities that make libraries valuable: a space for quiet reflection, a sanctuary for intellectual exploration, and a place where knowledge is nurtured and protected. Library cats, both real and fictional, are a bridge between the past and the present. They carry with them the quiet dignity of the libraries of old while continuing to charm and inspire us in the modern world. Whether through their appearances in literature, art, or social media, the library cat has proven to be more than just a quaint figure. It's a symbol of the values that libraries represent: knowledge, wisdom, serenity, and resilience. Their continued presence in popular culture is a testament to the lasting impact they've had on our collective imagination. And as long as there are libraries, there will always be a place for the humble library cat, silently watching over the books and inspiring generations of readers and thinkers. As libraries continue to evolve into dynamic centers of community engagement, the role of cats has adapted as well, becoming much more than just a symbol of serenity or comfort. Today, library cats are not only silent guardians of books but also active participants in creating a welcoming and inclusive environment for library patrons. Their presence has become an essential aspect of how libraries connect with their communities, providing emotional support, encouraging literacy, and enhancing the library experience for all visitors. In the modern library, cats have taken on the role of community mascots. They serve as living, breathing symbols of the library's open-door policy, creating a sense of belonging for everyone who walks through the door. Whether a child visiting the library for the first time, an elderly patron looking for comfort, or a student buried under piles of textbooks, the presence of a cat offers a gentle reminder that libraries are places of refuge and peace. Library cats can make the library feel like home, a space where people are not only allowed to learn but also to relax and find solace. Cats also contribute to libraries in ways that go beyond just being comforting figures. They can serve as powerful tools in literacy and educational outreach. In many libraries, especially those that offer children's programming, cats are integrated into reading initiatives. Libraries often host Read to the Cat programs, where young children read books aloud to a calm, friendly cat. This setup provides a non-judgmental and relaxing environment where children can practice reading without the fear of making mistakes or being critiqued. Research has shown that reading aloud to animals can increase children's confidence and reading skills, helping them become more engaged with books and reading as a lifelong habit. Moreover, the library cat can inspire creativity and foster a love of learning in a way that no textbook can. The playful antics of a cat can spark a child's imagination, providing an entry point into stories, art, and learning. For adults, a cat can be a stress reliever during long hours of study or research. Their presence has been shown to reduce anxiety, making libraries feel like a safe and supportive space to engage with complex ideas and challenging material. This sense of calm is especially valuable in today's fast-paced, technology-driven world, where many people struggle to find moments of peace and reflection. In addition to these educational roles, library cats are increasingly being recognized for their contribution to mental health and well-being. Mental health awareness has become an important topic in recent years, and libraries have taken strides to be inclusive and supportive of people with mental health challenges. The presence of a library cat can be part of a larger library initiative to create a safe, supportive, and inclusive environment for everyone. For individuals dealing with stress, anxiety, or social isolation, spending time in a library with a friendly cat nearby can provide a calming effect that promotes healing and well-being. Library cats create a unique environment where knowledge and comfort intersect, helping patrons find balance in their lives as they engage with the wealth of information surrounding them. Library cats are also involved in many community-building activities. They often play central roles in library events and outreach programs, helping to foster a sense of unity and connection within the local community. Cats are natural conversation starters, and their playful, friendly nature encourages interaction between library staff and patrons. Through the library cat, patrons from diverse backgrounds can engage with the library in a way that feels informal, welcoming, and humanizing. This is especially important in libraries that serve a broad demographic, including people who may feel intimidated by academic spaces, or those who may not regularly visit libraries. The cat's presence softens the environment, making the library feel more accessible to everyone. Another area where library cats contribute to community engagement is in promoting library services and programs. In many cases, libraries with resident cats feature them in their promotional materials. Cats often appear in flyers, advertisements, and social media posts, serving as friendly and approachable ambassadors for the library's events. Their charm and popularity can draw attention to programs that patrons might not otherwise know about. For example, a library cat might be featured in a post about an upcoming reading event, drawing attention to the event itself and encouraging visitors to come to the library. In this way, the cat acts as an unofficial ambassador for the library, helping to raise awareness and increase community participation in library programs. The presence of a cat in a library also speaks to a broader cultural shift toward animal companionship in public spaces. Libraries have long been places of learning and knowledge, but today they are increasingly becoming community hubs where emotional and social connections are formed. As libraries continue to embrace their role in fostering well-being and community engagement, library cats offer a perfect complement to these efforts. They embody the values of inclusivity, support, and comfort, values that are central to the evolving mission of the library in the modern age. In some cases, the inclusion of cats in libraries has even helped raise awareness for animal welfare causes. Cats adopted by libraries often come from shelters or rescue organizations, which gives these animals a second chance at a loving home. Patrons who are drawn to the library to meet the cat may also learn more about local animal rescue efforts and how they can help animals in need. This adds another layer of community involvement, as libraries continue to promote not only intellectual growth but also social responsibility and compassion for animals. In sum, the modern library cat has evolved far beyond its historical role as a protector of books. Today, library cats serve as symbols of emotional support, engagement, and community. They inspire creativity, foster a love of reading, and provide comfort to library patrons, making libraries spaces of healing as well as intellectual exploration. As libraries continue to grow and adapt to the needs of their communities, the library cat will undoubtedly remain a cherished companion, a silent yet powerful presence that reminds us of the timeless value of knowledge, connection, and peace. As we move further into the 21st century, libraries find themselves grappling with the complexities of the digital age. The rise of e-books, online resources, and digital libraries has transformed the way we access and engage with knowledge. In this fast-evolving landscape, the role of the physical library and its beloved feline residents is continually shifting. But just as libraries have adapted to new technologies over the centuries, so too have the library cats. In fact, the presence of cats in libraries today is more symbolic than ever, reminding us of the enduring importance of knowledge, connection, and comfort, values that transcend the rapid digital advancements surrounding us. The question that many ask in the digital age is, do we still need physical libraries and the cats that inhabit them? As digital content continues to dominate, some wonder whether the role of the traditional library, and by extension, its resident cat, has become obsolete. The rise of digital libraries, e-readers, and online learning resources means that many people no longer visit libraries in the traditional sense. However, this shift does not mean that the presence of the library cat has lost its relevance. In fact, it is in the face of this technological revolution that the role of the library cat has evolved into something even more vital. Modern libraries are more than just places that store physical books. They are community hubs that offer access to digital resources, provide social spaces, and foster an environment for creativity and learning. In a world where information is increasingly available at our fingertips, the physical library has had to adapt, embracing technology while maintaining the core values that make libraries important. Cats have become part of this evolving narrative, acting as symbols of continuity and tradition amidst the digital shift. Their presence in these spaces is a reminder that while the tools and methods we use to access information may change, the essence of the library as a sanctuary for learning, community, and solace remains intact. The role of the library cat today can be seen as emblematic of this adaptability. Just as libraries have embraced digital technologies without losing sight of their primary mission to foster learning and connection, the library cat has adapted to the times, finding new ways to remain relevant in this modern context. In many libraries, cats have become part of the overall experience, not just as mascots but as a way to humanize the space and make it feel more accessible. Even as libraries continue to digitize and offer virtual resources, the cat provides a comforting, tangible reminder that libraries are about more than just information. They are about creating spaces where people can connect, reflect, and find peace. One of the most beautiful aspects of the library cat's role in the digital age is how they bridge the gap between the physical and digital worlds. Libraries now offer a hybrid experience, where patrons can access digital content while still enjoying the comforting presence of physical spaces. Similarly, library cats exist in both the tangible world of the library and the virtual world of social media. Cats are stars on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter, where their antics are shared by followers from all over the globe. These social media platforms offer an opportunity to connect with library patrons beyond the walls of the physical library, allowing library cats to become symbols of knowledge, comfort, and curiosity in the digital world. Moreover, library cats are becoming integral to the library's outreach and engagement efforts. As libraries extend their services to the online realm, cats are helping to strengthen the sense of community that libraries offer. Cats are featured in online promotional materials, virtual events, and live-streamed reading sessions, offering a friendly face in the digital world of library services. This intersection of the physical and digital worlds allows library cats to continue their mission of fostering a sense of connection and well-being in both spaces, reminding us that libraries are at their heart about people and cats too. The future of library cats in a digital age is not just about maintaining the old traditions, but also about creating new meaningful interactions between cats and their patrons. As libraries become more focused on community engagement, cats continue to play an essential role in making these spaces welcoming and emotionally supportive. Library cats are increasingly involved in initiatives that promote mental health, well-being, and emotional support. With many people facing stress and isolation in today's fast-paced, often overwhelming digital world, the presence of a cat can offer a much-needed reprieve. In this way, the library cat's role is more important than ever in providing emotional comfort, whether in person or online. Furthermore, the growing trend of library cats becoming involved in youth programming continues to be an exciting development. Cats are increasingly used in educational settings to promote reading and literacy, especially for children who might struggle with reading aloud in front of others. Programs like Read to the Cat allow children to read books aloud to a cat in a low-pressure, non-judgmental environment. This practice not only promotes literacy, but also teaches empathy and care, as children learn to interact with animals in a kind and respectful way. These programs also provide an emotional and social boost, giving children the opportunity to connect with the cats while improving their confidence and reading skills. As we look forward, the library cat's role as a cultural symbol, comforter, and emotional support animal will likely continue to expand. In the future, we may see more libraries adopting cats for therapeutic programs, as emotional well-being becomes a larger focus of library services. The cat's quiet, calming influence will remain a cornerstone of library culture, offering a reminder of the simple pleasures of reading, reflection, and intellectual pursuit. In conclusion, while the technological landscape surrounding libraries continues to change, the role of the library cat is one that is adaptable and enduring. Cats will continue to serve as symbols of continuity, bringing a sense of peace and connection to libraries that both embrace the digital age and preserve the traditional values of learning and community.
As the library evolves, the cat will remain a faithful companion in this journey, a living bridge between the past and the future, between the physical and the digital, reminding us that no matter how much things change, there are some things worth holding on to. In this next section, we explore a particularly heartwarming and often understated aspect of the library cat's role: the emotional bond that forms between library cats and their patrons. While the practical duties of library cats, keeping pests away, providing comfort and enhancing the library atmosphere, are often highlighted, it's important to consider the deep personal connection that these feline companions develop with the people who spend time in their presence. Cats, with their independent yet affectionate nature, are able to forge a unique relationship with library visitors that can offer emotional healing, support and a sense of belonging. There's something universally soothing about the presence of a cat, especially in the quiet, studious environment of a library. A cat's purring has been scientifically proven to have a calming effect on humans. It's as if the very act of a cat being present, with its slow movements and peaceful demeanor, encourages library patrons to relax, slow down, and embrace the calm of the environment. The simple act of being around a cat can help reduce anxiety, alleviate stress and improve overall well-being. For many people, this emotional comfort is an essential part of the library experience. It's not just about books or information, it's about finding solace and peace in a space that can often feel overwhelming or isolating. Think about a student studying for an exam, their mind racing with stress and the pressure to succeed. Or consider an elderly patron who may be feeling the weight of loneliness and isolation. For these individuals, the presence of a library cat can provide a sense of calm and grounding. They're not just sitting in a library surrounded by books, they're sharing the space with a quiet, comforting presence that offers a moment of respite from the outside world. Whether it's a cat curling up in a lap during a long study session, or a cat quietly following a visitor through the aisles, the emotional bond that forms between the cat and its patrons is one of mutual comfort and understanding. This emotional connection is especially evident in libraries that prioritize inclusivity and accessibility for people of all ages and backgrounds. Libraries today are not just repositories of books, they are community centers that offer a wide range of programs and services designed to support and uplift their patrons. Many libraries actively create spaces where people can come together, connect and feel a sense of belonging. Cats in this context serve as emotional anchors, reminding patrons that they are welcome and valued. They offer a sense of familiarity and warmth, making libraries feel more like home. A particularly beautiful aspect of the emotional bond between library cats and their patrons is how it extends beyond the physical library walls. Many modern library cats have become beloved figures in their communities, with their stories shared on social media, in local newspapers, and even in books. For example, Dewey Read More Books, the famous cat of Spencer Public Library, became a symbol not just of that library, but of the community itself. His story, from being found abandoned in a book drop to becoming the face of the library, touched hearts across the world. Dewey's presence in the library provided emotional comfort to thousands of visitors, and his legacy continues to inspire new generations of readers and cat lovers.
The emotional bond between library cats and their patrons is one of the most powerful aspects of their legacy. Library cats, by simply being present, offer comfort and connection to people from all walks of life. Whether they are curled up in a corner, watching over a student's study session, or providing a soothing presence during moments of stress or loneliness, these cats offer something that goes beyond their symbolic role as guardians of knowledge. They provide an emotional anchor in the midst of intellectual work, reminding us that libraries are not just about books, they are about the human experience, the emotional journey of learning and discovery. The legacy of the library cat also lives on through their cultural impact. These cats, from the legendary Dewey Read More Books to the viral sensations of today's internet-famous library cats, continue to capture our imaginations and hearts. They serve as ambassadors for libraries, drawing attention to the importance of these spaces in our communities. Whether they are inspiring children to read or providing a sense of comfort to stressed-out university students, library cats are an essential part of the library's ongoing mission to support the emotional and intellectual well-being of its patrons. In a world that is becoming increasingly digital, where knowledge is often consumed in fast-paced, fleeting ways, the presence of a library cat serves as a reminder of the timeless value of books, reading and reflection. The cat's quiet, patient presence in the library embodies the virtues that libraries represent: knowledge, curiosity, focus, and the importance of taking the time to reflect and learn. As libraries continue to adapt to the needs of the digital age, the library cat will remain a symbol of the core values that libraries have always represented. So, what is the future of the library cat? As libraries continue to evolve and face new challenges, it is likely that the role of the library cat will remain as symbolic as ever. Cats will continue to provide comfort, companionship, and a sense of peace in spaces where learning and intellectual engagement are central. Whether in physical libraries or in the digital realm, the library cat's legacy will endure. Their presence will continue to remind us of the importance of knowledge and the value of emotional connection in a world that often feels disconnected and fast-paced. As we bid farewell to this journey through the history and legacy of library cats, we are left with the comforting thought that no matter how much the world changes, there will always be a place for these quiet, wise, and resilient creatures. They will continue to be part of the story of libraries, embodying the spirit of intellectual pursuit, emotional comfort, and the timeless bond between humans and the pursuit of knowledge. So whether curled up on a bookshelf, pacing the library aisles, or watching over the stacks, the library cat's legacy is far from over. It's only just beginning. Now, as we end this exploration, take a moment to reflect on your own connection to libraries and knowledge. Think of the cats that have quietly made their mark in the libraries you've visited, and remember that, like the library itself, they will always be there, silent guardians, companions, and symbols of the intellectual and emotional journeys we undertake every time we open a book. Sweet dreams.